After a long day of airports and travel, Marcus wanted only one quiet room where his exhausted little daughter could finally rest.
Dad, are we finally home for tonight?
Before Marcus had even finished speaking, Derek looked at his clothes and decided that he did not belong there.
I'm sorry, sir. We have no rooms available.
Marcus did not argue. He simply watched Derek's polite expression turn cold when he realized Marcus looked like an ordinary traveler.
Could you please check once more? My daughter is exhausted.
Only moments later, a wealthy-looking couple arrived.
Welcome. We have a beautiful room ready for you.
And suddenly, Derek had a room ready without hesitation. That small movement told Marcus everything. There had been rooms all along. The lie had been about appearance.
So the rooms were never the problem.
Maya could see the truth on the reservation screen. Rooms were open, but fear kept her silent.
There are rooms, I know there are.
Marcus knew children could feel humiliation long before they understood the word for it.
Their choices say nothing about who we are.
Marcus did not raise his voice. He asked only to speak with the manager and have the system checked honestly.
Then let me speak with your manager.
Derek brought Richard from the back office, and Richard arrived already convinced that Marcus was the problem.
I'm told you are causing a disturbance.
Richard did not ask what happened or check the system. He looked at Marcus and decided he did not belong.
This hotel maintains standards, sir. Escort them outside before this becomes more serious.
Richard called security and ordered Marcus and Zoe removed, turning a simple request for honesty into public humiliation. For several seconds, he said nothing. He stood beneath the soft gold lights of the lobby, while Zoe leaned against him, her small body heavy with exhaustion. The polished marble floor reflected the chandelier overhead. Somewhere near the lounge, a pianist played a slow, elegant melody. Guests drifted through the lobby with designer luggage, expensive watches, and the relaxed confidence of people who had never needed to wonder whether a door would be opened for them. And in the middle of all that comfort, Marcus and his daughter had been made to feel like an inconvenience. Derek had already turned his attention back to the couple who had arrived after them. His voice changed the moment he spoke to them. It became warmer, brighter, polished in a way it had never been when he spoke to Marcus. He welcomed them with the kind of smile that belonged in brochures and advertisements. He asked about their trip. He complimented their luggage. He spoke about the hotel's amenities, as though he were personally proud of every polished surface in the building. Then, without even checking twice, he assigned them a room. Marcus watched the key card slide across the counter. That small movement told him everything. There had been rooms. There had always been rooms. The lie had never been about availability. It had been about appearance. Zoe lifted her face from Marcus's side and looked toward the desk. She was too tired to be fully upset, but she was old enough to sense when adults were being unfair. Her eyes followed Derek as he gave the other guests directions toward the elevator. Marcus looked down at her and gently adjusted the strap of her backpack. He had promised her a warm shower, room service, and a bed with too many pillows. Before their flight, he had told her that they would make a little adventure out of the night, even though they both knew they were tired. Zoe had smiled at that idea. She had spent most of the flight curled against him, holding the small stuffed rabbit she brought everywhere. Now, her excitement had disappeared. Marcus had learned long ago that children could feel humiliation before they knew the word for it. They could hear it in the tone adults used. They could see it in the way people looked away. They could sense it in the sudden stiffness of a room when someone decided they did not belong. Marcus had seen that truth in his own childhood. His father had worked as a night security guard for nearly 30 years. Not in one grand hotel, but in several. He had worked in office buildings, private clubs, luxury apartment towers, and restaurants where the customers spent in one evening what he earned in a month. He wore a uniform every night, stood near entrances for hours, opened doors for people who rarely looked at him, and walked empty hallways, long after the city had gone quiet. Marcus remembered waiting up for him as a boy. He remembered the sound of his father's keys at the door after midnight. He remembered the tired way his father took off his shoes in the kitchen, trying not to wake anyone. He remembered the faint smell of rain, coffee, and the cold night air clinging to his coat. Most of all, he remembered how his father never complained. But children notice more than adults think. Marcus had heard enough fragments of conversation to understand that his father was treated differently by some people. He had heard about guests who snapped their fingers instead of saying hello. Managers who spoke to him as though he were invisible. People who assumed he was uneducated because he wore a uniform. People who called him only when they needed help, then looked through him the moment the problem was solved. His father had always told him that work had dignity, no matter what title came with it. But Marcus had also seen the sadness in his father's face on the nights when dignity was the only thing anyone had left him. That was why Marcus never forgot the feeling of being judged before being known. It was why he built his company with a different kind of promise. Years later, when Marcus had begun buying struggling hotels and turning them around, people had assumed his greatest advantage was his business instinct. They saw the growth, the renovations, the partnerships, the expansion into new cities. They saw a successful entrepreneur with a sharp eye for numbers and an even sharper eye for opportunity. What they did not always understand was that Marcus had never wanted to build hotels merely to create wealth. He wanted to create places where people felt human. He wanted every guest to feel welcome, whether they arrived in a suit or a sweatshirt, whether they had booked the penthouse or the smallest available room, whether they were famous, wealthy, tired, grieving, alone, or simply trying to make it through the night. He had built that principle into the company from the beginning. Respect before revenue, care before appearances, hospitality without judgment. Those were not slogans to Marcus. They were personal. And yet, standing in that lobby with Zoe half asleep beside him, he could feel those values slipping through the hands of people who had never understood them. Marcus finally looked at Derek again. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand attention. He simply asked whether Derek would be willing to check the system one more time. It was a reasonable request. A tired father asking for a room for his child. Nothing more. But Derek's smile faded. The warmth he had shown the wealthy couple vanished, as though someone had switched off a light. He stared at Marcus with the irritation of a man who believed he had already ended the conversation and should not have to repeat himself. He insisted that the hotel was fully booked. Then he added that Marcus might have better luck somewhere more suitable. The words were carefully chosen. Derek did not say exactly what he meant. He did not need to. The insult lived in the pause before the final word. It lived in the look he gave Marcus's hoodie. It lived in the quick glance toward Zoe, as though the presence of a tired child made them even more out of place. Some of the nearby guests heard it. A woman seated near the lounge lowered her magazine and looked toward the desk. A man waiting beside the elevators glanced over his shoulder. The bell attendant near the entrance shifted slightly, uncertain whether he should pretend not to notice. Behind the desk, Maya stood very still. She had been watching from the beginning. Maya had worked at the hotel for almost 2 years. She was good at her job. She remembered guest preferences, kept track of small details, and treated nervous travelers with patience. She was the kind of employee who noticed when someone needed help before they asked for it. But she had also learned something during those 2 years. The hotel had rules on paper, and then it had unspoken rules in practice. Richard, the evening manager, had his favorites. Derek was one of them. Derek had been there longer. He knew how to flatter important guests. He knew how to make wealthy customers feel seen. He had a polished manner that management often mistook for excellence. But Maya had seen another side of him. She had watched him become impatient with guests who spoke with accents. She had seen him dismiss people who looked nervous about money. She had heard him make jokes in the break room about people who did not fit the image he believed the hotel should project. Maya had never agreed with him, but she had never openly challenged him either. She had told herself that she was trying to keep her job. She had told herself that speaking up would only make things worse. She had told herself that someone with more authority would eventually notice. But as she looked at Zoe, tired and confused beside her father, those excuses began to feel smaller. Maya could see the reservation screen from where she stood. She knew exactly how many rooms were available. There were 12 standard rooms still open, 4 junior suites, 2 family suites, and 1 corner suite on the 18th floor that had been held back for late arrivals. She could have said something. One sentence would have been enough. But fear had a way of making silence feel safer than truth. Marcus noticed her hesitation. He saw the way her eyes moved from the screen to Derek, then from Derek to Zoe. He saw the guilt settle into her face. He did not know her name yet, but he understood what he was seeing. Maya was not cruel. She was afraid. And fear, Marcus knew, could make good people stand still while something wrong unfolded in front of them. He turned his attention back to Derek. There was no anger in his voice when he asked whether he could speak with the manager. That request changed the atmosphere immediately. Derek's posture stiffened. For the first time that night, uncertainty flickered across his face. It lasted only a moment, but Marcus saw it. Derek knew that a manager could check the system. A manager could see that rooms were available. A manager could ask why a guest had been turned away while others were welcomed. But Derek also knew something else. Richard trusted him, and Richard had his own ideas about who belonged in the hotel. Derek disappeared through the door behind the desk. As he went, Maya kept her eyes on Marcus. She looked as though she wanted to apologize, but no words came. Zoe tugged gently at Marcus's sleeve. Her voice was quiet. She asked why the man at the desk did not want to help them. Marcus looked down at her, and for the first time that night, a little pain moved across his face. Not because Derek had insulted him. Marcus could handle that. He had spent his life learning how to survive other people's assumptions. What hurt was that Zoe had been pulled into it. She was young enough to believe hotels were places where people smiled at you, gave you little soaps, and told you where the elevators were. She had not yet learned that some adults treated kindness like a privilege instead of a responsibility. Marcus did not want that lesson to reach her tonight. So he told her, gently, that sometimes people made decisions before they knew the full story. He told her that it did not mean they were right. He told her that the way someone treated you said more about their character than it did about yours. Zoe listened quietly. Then she rested her head against him again. That simple gesture made the woman near the lounge look away for a moment. She suddenly seemed embarrassed to be watching. The businessman near the elevator checked his phone, but not because he had received a message. He was avoiding the discomfort in the air. The lobby had become a place where everyone could see the unfairness, but no one yet knew what to do about it. A few minutes later, Richard came through the back office door. He moved with the confidence of a man who had spent too long being obeyed. His suit was perfectly tailored. His tie was straight. His shoes were polished enough to reflect the lobby lights. He looked less like someone arriving to solve a problem and more like someone arriving to shut one down. Derek walked beside him, speaking in a low voice. Marcus could not hear every word, But he did not need to. Derek's body language told the story. He leaned toward Richard. He gestured toward Marcus. He shook his head as though he were describing an unreasonable guest, a disruptive guest, a difficult guest. By the time Richard reached the front desk, he had already chosen a side. He did not begin by asking Marcus what happened. He did not ask to see the reservation system. He did not ask Maya whether there were rooms available. He did not ask why another couple had been checked in moments after Marcus was told the hotel was full. Instead, he looked Marcus up and down. It was a brief glance, but it carried years of judgment. Marcus had seen that glance in boardrooms before people knew his name. He had seen it in restaurants when hosts assumed he was waiting for someone else. He had seen it in private meetings when executives assumed the older white man beside him was the real decision maker. Richard looked at Marcus the same way. Not as a guest, not as a father, not as a person who might deserve the benefit of the doubt, but as a problem. Richard asked what the issue was. Marcus explained calmly. He said he had asked for a room for himself and his daughter. He said Derek had told him there were none available. He said another couple had arrived after them and had been given a room immediately. He asked only that someone check the system honestly. His voice remained controlled. That made Richard even more dismissive. Richard listened with the shallow patience of someone pretending to be fair. Then he turned to Derek, who repeated the lie with more confidence now that his manager was standing beside him. Derek claimed that the rooms had been reserved for priority guests. Marcus asked what priority meant. Richard answered that certain reservations and memberships received special consideration. It was not a complete lie. Luxury hotels did have systems for priority guests, but it was not the truth either. The rooms Derek had assigned were not reserved for anyone. The couple had simply walked in. No special membership had been checked. No priority status had been confirmed. Richard was using policy as a shield, and Marcus recognized it immediately. Policies were supposed to guide people toward fairness, but in the wrong hands they became excuses for cruelty. Marcus asked Richard to show him the policy. Richard's expression hardened. The request was still calm, still reasonable, but Richard heard it as a challenge. He told Marcus that guests did not get to demand internal documents. He suggested that Marcus was misunderstanding how luxury hospitality worked. He said the hotel maintained certain standards and that the staff had the right to make decisions that protected the experience of its guests. The words were polished. The meaning was ugly. Marcus looked around the lobby. He noticed the guests listening now. He noticed Maya's hands trembling slightly near the keyboard. He noticed the security guard standing near the entrance, who had been quietly summoned by Derek while Richard spoke. The guard was a broad-shouldered man named Daniel. He had worked in security for years. Unlike Derek and Richard, he did not appear smug or pleased by the situation. He looked uncomfortable. His eyes moved from Marcus to Zoe, then back to Richard. Daniel had seen difficult guests before. He had dealt with yelling, threats, intoxicated visitors, stolen luggage, and arguments that got out of control. But Marcus was not shouting. He was not threatening anyone. He was standing quietly beside an exhausted little girl and asking why the truth could not be checked. Daniel knew the difference between a problem and a person being treated like one. Still, Richard had authority, and authority had a way of making decent people question their own instincts. Richard's voice grew colder. He told Marcus that the hotel was not able to accommodate him, and that it would be best for him to leave before the matter became more complicated. Marcus asked one final question. He asked Richard whether he was refusing him because there were truly no rooms available, or because Richard had decided Marcus did not look like the kind of guest the hotel wanted. For the first time, Richard looked genuinely irritated. His face tightened. His eyes shifted toward the other guests. He did not want to answer directly, because the truth would sound terrible out loud. So instead, he accused Marcus of trying to create a scene. That was the tactic. When people could not defend what they had done, they often changed the subject. They turned the victim's calm questions into aggression. They called truth inconvenient. They called dignity difficult. They hoped that embarrassment would force the other person to leave before anyone had to confront the real issue. Richard told Daniel to escort Marcus and Zoe outside. The words landed heavily in the lobby. Zoe looked up at her father again. This time, she did not ask why they could not have a room. She asked why the hotel workers were trying to make them leave when helping people was supposed to be their job. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the lobby more sharply than any shout could have. For a moment, no one moved. Derek looked away. Maya closed her eyes briefly, as though she could no longer bear to watch. Daniel took a step forward, then stopped. Richard's jaw tightened. The woman near the lounge placed her magazine on the table. The businessman by the elevator no longer pretended not to be listening. Even the couple Derek had just checked in looked uncomfortable now. They had come in expecting a quiet night at a luxury hotel. Instead, they were watching a tired father and child being treated as though they had done something wrong simply by walking through the door. Marcus felt Zoe's hand slip into his. He held it carefully. Then he looked at Daniel. Marcus did not blame him. He could see that Daniel was not enjoying this. He could see the conflict in his face. Daniel was being told to follow orders, and Marcus understood that jobs could make people feel trapped. So Marcus spoke to him with respect. He told Daniel that he wasn't there to cause trouble. He said he would not resist. He only wanted the hotel to be honest about why it was trying to remove him and his daughter. Daniel nodded slightly. It was the smallest gesture, but it mattered. Because in that moment, Daniel was no longer looking at Marcus through Richard's eyes. He was seeing him clearly. And once a person began to see clearly, it became harder to keep pretending nothing was wrong. Richard, however, had already gone too far to step back gracefully. He told Marcus that if he refused to leave, the situation could become more serious. The threat was unnecessary. That was what made it so revealing. Marcus had not raised his voice. He had not insulted anyone. He had not even stepped away from the desk. But Richard wanted the power of making him feel small. He wanted Marcus to understand that he could be removed, dismissed, and humiliated without anyone caring. What Richard did not understand was that Marcus had spent a lifetime learning that dignity did not come from other people's approval. It came from what you refused to become when they tried to strip it away. Marcus looked around one last time. The lobby he had helped design was full of details he remembered personally. The lighting had been chosen to feel warm instead of intimidating. The seating had been arranged so travelers would not feel exposed when they arrived tired or alone. The welcome desk had been lowered slightly on one side, so guests in wheelchairs could check in comfortably. The training manuals for every employee in the company had repeated the same principle. Every person who entered the building should be treated as though their dignity mattered. Now, standing in that same lobby, Marcus saw how easily beautiful buildings could hide ugly behavior. He saw how a company could print values on paper and still fail the moment no one believed someone important was watching. That was why he had never announced his visits in advance. Marcus often traveled without assistance, without security, and without the polished image people expected from a hotel owner. He wanted to know what happened when the staff thought they were dealing with ordinary people. He wanted to see whether kindness existed only when cameras were on, executives were present, or wealthy guests were nearby. Most of the time, he was proud of what he found. Tonight, he was not. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and took out his phone. Derek watched with a faint smile, convinced Marcus was calling someone to complain. Richard assumed he was calling for a ride. Neither man looked worried. In their minds, they had already decided who Marcus was. A tired man, a rejected guest, someone with no power, someone they could push out of the building and forget by morning. Marcus scrolled through his contacts, found a number, and made one call. He did not speak loudly. He did not explain everything. He only said that he was at the downtown property, that there had been a serious failure in guest treatment, and that he needed Thomas Webb to come to the lobby immediately. Then he ended the call. Richard gave a short, humorless laugh. He asked whether Marcus was trying to intimidate the staff. Marcus did not answer. He simply looked at Zoe, then back at the front desk. The wait that followed felt longer than it really was. Maya stood frozen behind the counter, staring at the phone in Marcus's hand. Something about the way he had made the call unsettled her. It had not sounded like a complaint. It had not sounded like desperation. It had sounded like someone giving a calm instruction to a person who would understand exactly what it meant. Daniel noticed it too. The security guard shifted his stance and looked toward Richard. For the first time, doubt had become visible in his face. Derek tried to cover his discomfort by pretending nothing had changed. He began organizing papers on the desk. Richard straightened his tie. The couple who had checked in quietly stepped away from the counter, suddenly unsure whether they wanted to be part of what was happening. And then, from the far end of the lobby, the elevator doors opened. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out quickly. His name was Thomas Webb. He was the chief executive officer of the entire hotel group, and he was walking toward Marcus with an expression that made Derek, Richard, and Maya realize that the man in the gray hoodie was not who they thought he was. Not even close. Thomas Webb did not slow down as he crossed the lobby. The moment he saw Marcus standing beside Zoe, his entire expression changed. The urgency in his face was obvious, but what stunned everyone watching was the respect behind it. Thomas was not approaching Marcus like a manager coming to calm down an upset guest. He was approaching him like someone who had just realized that a serious failure had taken place under the roof of the man who owned the entire company. Derek noticed it first. The confidence that had carried him through the evening disappeared almost instantly. His fingers stopped moving across the desk. His shoulders stiffened. He looked from Thomas to Marcus, then back to Thomas again, as though his mind could not make sense of what he was seeing. Richard's reaction was slower, but even more painful to watch. For several long seconds, he stood perfectly still. He had been so certain of himself moments earlier. He had believed the hotel belonged to people who looked polished, wealthy, and important. He had believed his title gave him the power to decide who deserved patience and who deserved humiliation. But now the chief executive officer of the entire hotel group was walking straight past him, not toward Derek, not toward the front desk, toward Marcus. Thomas reached Marcus and immediately apologized. He did not apologize in the vague, polished language managers often used when they wanted a problem to disappear. He apologized with the seriousness of a man who understood the damage had already been done. He said that he had come as quickly as he could. He said he had received Marcus's message and understood that something deeply wrong had happened. Then, in front of every guest, every employee, and every person who had watched the situation unfold, Thomas addressed Marcus with the title no one in that lobby had expected to hear. "Mr. Johnson." The silence became absolute. Maya's eyes widened. Daniel, the security guard, looked at Marcus again, but this time with a completely different understanding. The exhausted father in the gray hoodie was not simply a guest who had been treated unfairly. He was Marcus Johnson, the founder and owner of the hotel group. The man whose name appeared in annual reports, corporate training materials, investor conferences, and internal company messages. The man who had built the very hotel where Richard had tried to throw him out. Derek's face lost its color. Richard looked as though the floor beneath him had shifted. But Marcus did not look triumphant. That was what made the moment even heavier. He did not smile. He did not step forward to embarrass them. He did not enjoy the fear in their faces. Instead, he looked down at Zoe, whose hand was still wrapped around his, then back at Thomas. Marcus told him that he had come to the hotel after a long flight with his daughter. He had asked for one room. He had been told there were none available. Then he had watched another couple receive a room only moments later. He explained that when he asked for clarification, he had been treated as a problem. When he asked for a manager, he had been judged before anyone checked the facts. And when he refused to accept a lie, he and his tired child had been threatened with removal from the building. Thomas listened without interrupting. His expression grew harder with every sentence. Marcus did not exaggerate. He did not need to. The truth was already standing in front of everyone. The reservation system was behind the desk. Maya had seen the available rooms. Daniel had heard Richard's order. The guests nearby had witnessed Derek's sudden change in attitude when the well-dressed couple entered. There was no confusion left, only accountability. Thomas turned to Richard first. He asked whether Marcus's account was accurate. Richard opened his mouth, but for the first time that night, he had no polished explanation ready. He tried to say that there had been a misunderstanding. He claimed that Derek had been following procedure. He suggested that the situation had become difficult because Marcus had challenged the staff in front of other guests. But even as he spoke, the weakness of his words became obvious. He had not checked the system. He had not asked Maya what she saw. He had not investigated the available rooms. He had not shown concern for Zoe. He had only looked at Marcus and decided that someone dressed like him did not deserve the same respect as someone dressed in expensive clothes. Thomas asked Richard a simple question. He asked whether the hotel's standards included judging guests by their appearance. Richard could not answer, because there was only one honest answer, and everyone knew it. Then Thomas turned to Derek. Derek tried to defend himself by claiming he had assumed the rooms needed to be held for preferred guests. He said he had been trying to protect the hotel's reputation. He said that he had not intended to insult Marcus or Zoe. But Marcus looked at him with a calm disappointment that was more powerful than anger. He told Derek that the problem was not whether Derek knew his identity. The problem was that Derek had believed it was acceptable to lie to a father and child because he thought they had no power. Marcus explained that respect was not something guests earned by wearing the right clothes. It was not a reward for wealth, status, or influence. It was the minimum every person deserved before anyone knew their name. Derek lowered his eyes. He had no answer for that either. Thomas asked Maya to step forward. At first, she looked frightened. She had spent the entire evening trapped between what she knew was right and what she feared might happen if she spoke. Her hands were shaking slightly as she came around the desk. She looked at Marcus, then at Thomas, then at Richard. Thomas asked her whether rooms had been available. Maya hesitated. For one painful second, it seemed as though fear might win again. Then she looked at Zoe. The little girl was still tired, still quiet, still holding her father's hand. But there was something about seeing Zoe there that finally broke through Maya's silence. She told the truth. She said there had been rooms available from the beginning. She said Derek knew it. She said she had seen open rooms in the system. She admitted that she had been afraid to challenge him because Richard always took Derek's side. She admitted that she should have spoken sooner. Her voice trembled as she said it. But once the truth started, it did not stop. Maya explained that this was not the first time Derek had judged guests based on appearance. She had seen him speak differently to people who seemed wealthy and important. She had seen him dismiss guests who looked uncertain, tired, or out of place. She had kept quiet because she had believed that speaking up would cost her the job she needed. Richard looked at her with disbelief, not because he was shocked by what Derek had done, but because he was shocked that Maya had finally found the courage to say it. Thomas listened carefully. Then he asked Daniel what he had witnessed. The security guard looked toward Richard, then toward Marcus. Daniel did not rush his answer. He was clearly uncomfortable being placed in the middle of the situation. But he spoke honestly. He said Marcus had never been aggressive. He said Zoe had been visibly exhausted. He said Richard had ordered him to escort them out, despite the fact that Marcus had only asked for a truthful explanation. Daniel admitted that he had known something felt wrong. He said he should have questioned the order sooner. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood what it meant for Daniel to say that in front of his manager. It took courage to admit when fear had almost made you part of an injustice. Thomas looked around the lobby. By then, no one was pretending not to watch. The woman near the lounge had stood up. The businessman by the elevator had moved closer. Even the couple who had been checked in ahead of Marcus looked ashamed. They had not asked for special treatment, but they had benefited from it without realizing someone else had been denied. Thomas addressed the entire room. He said that this hotel had not failed because a guest complained. It had failed because employees had forgotten the purpose of hospitality. The building was beautiful. The rooms were expensive. The service was supposed to be exceptional. But none of that mattered if a tired father and his child could walk through the front doors and be treated as though they were less worthy than everyone else. Then he looked directly at Derek. Thomas informed him that he was being terminated immediately. Derek stared at him. The words seemed to take a moment to sink in. He had believed the front desk gave him power. He had believed he could decide who deserved warmth and who deserved rejection. He had used a lie about room availability to make someone feel small. And now, in the same lobby where he had tried to deny Marcus a place to stay, he was losing the job that had made him feel important. But Derek's termination was not simply because he had insulted the owner. Marcus made that clear. Derek was being fired because he had lied to a guest, because he had judged people by appearance, because he had used the hotel's name to make cruelty look like policy, and because he had forgotten that hospitality was not a costume you wore for wealthy people. It was a responsibility. Derek tried to speak. He tried to explain that he had not known who Marcus was. Marcus stopped him gently. He told Derek that knowing would have changed nothing. That was the point. Derek should have treated Marcus with dignity, even if he had been an unknown traveler with no money, no title, and no influence. He should have treated Zoe with kindness because she was a tired child, not because she happened to be the daughter of the hotel owner. The truth settled over the lobby like a weight. Then Thomas turned toward Richard. Richard had been quiet for several minutes. His face had become stiff and pale. He seemed to understand that his position was no longer safe, but he still tried to hold on to the authority that had failed him. He said he had been following the information given to him. He said he had trusted his senior employee. He said he had been trying to protect the hotel from disruption. Marcus listened without expression. Then he reminded Richard that leadership was not about blindly protecting the people beneath you. Leadership was about asking questions when something did not feel right. It was about defending fairness even when it was inconvenient. It was about protecting guests, employees, and the values of the organization. Richard had not done any of those things. He had not checked the facts. He had not listened to Marcus. He had not noticed Zoe. He had used his position to make another human being feel powerless. And when he saw a man in a hoodie asking for fairness, he had decided that humiliation was easier than investigation. Thomas informed Richard that he was also being terminated, effective immediately. The difference between Derek and Richard was important. Derek had started the lie, but Richard had made it dangerous. He had taken a moment of prejudice and turned it into public humiliation. He had taken a tired father's request for a room and treated it like a threat. He had ordered security to remove a child from the hotel rather than admit that his employee might be wrong. That was why the consequences had to be serious. Richard's title had not protected him. His suit had not protected him. His confidence had not protected him. Because in the end, the power he thought he had was never meant to make others feel small. It was meant to make them feel safe. Marcus stood quietly as Derek and Richard were asked to leave the front desk area. Neither man received the scene they might have expected. No shouting, no dramatic revenge, no cruel words thrown back at them. Marcus did not need to humiliate them. Their own choices had already done that. The same people they had judged by appearances had watched them reveal their true character. The same lobby where they had tried to push Marcus out had become the place where everyone saw that their authority had been hollow all along. After they left, the lobby remained silent. Then Marcus turned to Maya. She looked terrified that she would be next. She admitted again that she should have spoken up earlier. She said she had known the rooms were available. She said she had seen the injustice, but had been afraid of Richard. She did not try to excuse herself. She did not pretend she had done enough. Marcus studied her for a moment. He understood that silence could cause harm. But he also understood that courage was not always loud at first. Sometimes it arrived late, trembling and uncertain, but still honest. Marcus told Maya that she had made a mistake by staying quiet. But he also told her that she had chosen truth when it mattered most. He said the company did not need employees who were afraid to protect what was right. It needed people who could learn from fear and become stronger because of it. Thomas nodded. Then Marcus asked Maya whether she was willing to help rebuild the culture at the hotel. Maya looked confused. Marcus explained that she would not be punished for telling the truth. Instead, she would be given an opportunity. She would be assigned to work directly with the hotel's guest experience and staff training team. Her role would be to help ensure that every employee understood what had gone wrong that night and why it could never happen again. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She had expected to lose everything. Instead, she had been given a chance to help create something better. Marcus then turned to Daniel. The security guard stood quietly near the entrance, still looking uncomfortable about how close he had come to escorting Marcus and Zoe outside. Marcus thanked him for stopping before the situation went further. He told Daniel that following orders was sometimes necessary, but it should never mean abandoning conscience. He said that a security guard's job was not only to protect property, it was to protect people. Daniel nodded, visibly moved. Marcus told Thomas that Daniel should remain in his position and be included in the next round of training. Not as punishment, but as a reminder that every employee, no matter their role, had the power to stop harm when they saw it. Only then did Marcus look down at Zoe. The entire time, she had remained close to him. She had watched the adults change their voices. She had seen the people who were cold to them suddenly become nervous. She had seen her father remain calm, while everyone around him seemed to lose control. Marcus bent slightly and asked her if she was still tired. Zoe nodded. Then, with the honesty only a child could offer, she asked whether they could finally go to their room. The lobby softened. A few people smiled through the tension. Thomas immediately stepped forward and offered to personally take them to the best available suite. But Marcus shook his head gently. He did not want the best room, because everyone now knew who he was. He wanted the room they should have been offered from the beginning. A clean, comfortable room for a father and daughter who had arrived tired after a long flight. Nothing more, and nothing less. Thomas understood. He asked Maya to prepare one of the family suites and make sure Zoe had everything she needed. Maya moved quickly, but this time her energy came from purpose rather than fear. She checked the reservation system herself. She selected a quiet room away from the elevators. She arranged for warm food, extra blankets, a child-sized robe, and a small basket of snacks. When she handed Marcus the key cards, her hands were steadier. She apologized again. Marcus accepted the apology, but he reminded her that the best apology was not what she said tonight. It was what she chose to do tomorrow. That night, Marcus and Zoe finally rode the elevator upstairs. As the doors closed, Zoe leaned against him and asked whether the hotel workers knew who he was now. Marcus looked at the numbers rising above the elevator doors. Then he told her that what mattered was not whether people knew who he was. What mattered was whether they learned to treat everyone kindly before they knew. 3 months later, the hotel looked the same from the outside. The marble still gleamed. The chandelier still hung above the lobby. The piano still played near the lounge. But inside, something had changed. Maya had become part of a new training program created across the entire hotel group. She was no longer just a receptionist trying to survive a difficult workplace. She had become a leader in guest experience, helping employees understand that hospitality was not about recognizing wealthy faces. It was about seeing human beings. The training sessions did not begin with numbers, sales goals, or luxury standards. They began with one question: how would you treat this person if you believed they had nothing to offer you? That question changed everything. Employees were taught to notice the tired parent, the nervous traveler, the older couple counting money carefully before checking in, the guest whose clothes did not match the hotel's expensive image, and the person who looked like they had nowhere else to go. They were taught that dignity should never depend on appearance. Daniel remained in security. He became known for his calm, respectful way of handling tense situations. He never forgot the night he almost followed an order he knew was wrong. And because he remembered it, he became more willing to speak up when something did not feel right. One rainy evening, 3 months after Marcus and Zoe had been denied a room, a family walked into the lobby. The father wore a faded jacket. The mother carried a sleeping toddler. Their luggage was old, and their shoes were wet from the rain. They looked exhausted. They looked uncertain. They looked like the kind of people Derek and Richard might once have dismissed before even hearing their names. But Maya saw them immediately. She stepped out from behind the desk before they had to ask for help. She welcomed them warmly. She asked whether they had traveled far. She noticed the child asleep against the mother's shoulder and offered them a quiet room away from the elevator. She did not look at their clothes. She did not look at their luggage. She did not make them prove that they belonged. She simply treated them as people who needed kindness. From the far side of the lobby, Marcus watched quietly. He had stopped by the hotel again without an announcement. This time, Zoe was with him too, holding her stuffed rabbit and looking much more awake than she had been 3 months earlier. She watched Maya help the family. Then she looked up at her father and smiled. Marcus smiled back. For the first time since that painful night, he felt that the hotel was beginning to become what he had always hoped it would be. Not perfect, but better. Because the real measure of a place was never the height of its ceilings, the shine of its floors, or the cost of its rooms. It was the way people were treated when no one believed they were important. Marcus had not won because he was the owner. He had won because he refused to let another person's prejudice take away his dignity. And Derek and Richard had not lost their jobs simply because they insulted a powerful man. They lost their jobs because they had forgotten something far more important. They had forgotten that every person deserves respect before they are asked to prove who they are. Because real character is not revealed by how we treat people who can reward us. It is revealed by how we treat the people we think cannot. And sometimes, the person standing quietly in front of you is not just a stranger. Sometimes, they are the moment that reveals who you truly are. If you believe kindness should never depend on status, share this story and tell us in the comments. Would you have spoken up if you had been standing in that lobby? The slap changed everything.
You do not tell me no.
Daniela stood frozen, stunned and deeply hurt, unable to understand why she had been slapped for simply doing her job.
Did anyone see that?
Her badge became a weapon.
People in your position should know better.
She had only followed protocol.
This corridor is restricted. Please return to reception.
Helen knew the truth.
She was helping me.
Vivian's lie found protection.
Get her out of my hospital. I never want to see her here again.
I'll handle it.
No one asked why.
You took my badge, but you never asked if I was hurt.
Silence followed her out.
I am sorry.
Then she called Samuel.
Samuel, they took my badge. They threw me out.
But it had begun earlier. Earlier that day, a chain reaction collision on the interstate had brought more than 20 injured people through the hospital doors in less than an hour. The trauma bays filled first, then the recovery rooms, then every space that could safely hold a patient with monitoring equipment. Nurses were called from outpatient services, surgical recovery, and specialty clinics. Doctors who had expected routine consultations found themselves treating internal bleeding, fractured ribs, head injuries, and terrified children separated from their parents. The hospital was not merely busy, it was stretched to its edge. In the middle of that crisis, Vivian Hollis arrived for a procedure that was never meant to be urgent. Vivian was 61 years old, immaculately dressed, sharply composed, and accustomed to entering rooms as though they had been built for her. Her family name appeared on plaques throughout the city. The Hollis Foundation had funded scholarship programs, museum exhibits, political campaigns, and hospital projects. 3 years earlier, the foundation had pledged several $1 million to St. Alden for a pediatric expansion that had not yet been completed. To most people in the hospital, Vivian was not just a donor. She was a force. The staff knew that her complaints reached the executive offices faster than emergency calls reached certain departments. They knew she had private contact numbers for members of the board. They knew that when Vivian Hollis was unhappy, someone usually found a way to make the problem disappear. That afternoon, the problem was supposed to be Daniela. Vivian had been scheduled for a minor cosmetic dermatology procedure in the outpatient wing. It was not dangerous. It was not time-sensitive. It could have been performed another day without any risk to her health. But the procedure required a small recovery area, nursing support, and a team that had suddenly been reassigned to patients coming out of emergency surgery. Daniela had been asked to help coordinate the delays. She approached Vivian with the same professionalism she gave every patient. She explained that the hospital was responding to a mass casualty event and that several staff members needed for Vivian's appointment had been pulled into critical care. She assured her that the procedure would be rescheduled quickly and that the medical team would contact her personally once the crisis had stabilized. It should have been a simple explanation. Instead, Vivian stared at Daniela as though she had been personally insulted. At first, Vivian spoke in the controlled, polished tone of someone who wanted to make sure everyone nearby understood that she believed herself to be above the inconvenience. She questioned why a hospital that had accepted millions from her family could not find one nurse and one room for a procedure that had been scheduled weeks earlier. Daniela explained again that patients with life-threatening injuries were being prioritized. That was when Vivian's expression changed. Her words became colder. Her patience became theatrical. She made comments about Daniela's manner, her accent, and the idea that someone in Daniela's position had the authority to tell her no. She did not need to shout at first. Her contempt was sharper when delivered quietly. Daniela had dealt with angry families before. She had been blamed for wait times she could not control, for outcomes she could not change, and for rules she did not create. She understood that fear often made people cruel, but Vivian was not afraid. Vivian was offended. There was a difference. Daniela stayed calm. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply repeated the truth that mattered most. The hospital had limited resources at that moment, and those resources had to go to the patients whose lives depended on them. Vivian seemed almost stunned that the answer did not change. To her, money had always changed answers. When she realized Daniela would not bend, Vivian removed her phone from her handbag and called Graham Mercer. Graham was the chief operating officer of St. Alden Regional. He had spent years building a reputation as a polished administrator who could calm donors, impress board members, and make difficult situations look manageable. He was known for speaking about integrity in public meetings and efficiency in private ones. But inside the hospital, people had learned that his definition of efficiency often depended on who was upset and how much influence that person had. He answered Vivian's call almost immediately. Daniela could hear only fragments of the conversation from where she stood, but she did not need to hear every word to understand what was happening. Vivian's tone was carefully wounded. She described herself as being mistreated. She framed Daniela's refusal to ignore triage rules as disrespect. She suggested that the hospital had forgotten who helped keep its doors open. Within minutes, Graham arrived in person. He did not ask what had happened in the emergency department. He did not ask how many trauma patients had arrived. He did not ask why Daniela had made the decision she did. He looked first at Vivian, then at Daniela, and it became clear that he had already chosen whose version of the story mattered. Graham took Daniela aside and told her that she would be moved temporarily to the third floor. The explanation sounded harmless on the surface. He said the situation had become tense and that it would be better for everyone if Daniela worked somewhere else for the remainder of the shift. But Daniela understood exactly what it was. It was punishment disguised as conflict management. She had followed the hospital's policies. She had protected emergency patients. She had spoken respectfully. Yet Graham was moving her because Vivian Hollis had complained. Daniela considered protesting. She considered asking him to put the order in writing. But a call came through about an elderly patient upstairs who needed assistance, and the emergency department remained overwhelmed. In that moment, she made the choice she always made when things were difficult. She put the patients first. She accepted the transfer and went upstairs. For the next 40 minutes, Daniela worked in the third-floor observation unit, helping nurses manage overflow from the emergency department. The patients there were not all critically injured, but many needed monitoring after surgery, after falls, or after sudden medical episodes that could become serious without warning. One of them was Helen Ward. Mrs. Ward was 78 years old and had come to St. Alden after becoming dizzy at home. Her daughter was stuck in traffic after the interstate accident, and Helen had been alone for most of the afternoon. She was frightened, but trying not to show it. Daniela noticed the way the woman kept watching the hallway each time footsteps passed, hoping someone familiar would appear. Daniela took a few extra minutes to explain what the doctors were monitoring. She adjusted the blanket around Helen's shoulders, made sure her call button was within reach, and promised that someone would keep her informed. To Daniela, it was a small act of care. To Helen, was the only moment that day when she felt like more than a chart number. That kindness would matter later. At the time, Daniela had no way of knowing that Vivian Hollis was moving through the same floor, angry that she had not been given the private route and private attention she believed she deserved. Vivian had been offered a quiet waiting area near the outpatient department while her procedure was formally postponed. But waiting was not something she accepted easily. She had left that area on her own, determined to find someone who would make the hospital's inconvenience disappear. A volunteer had told her that a private exit on the third floor could lead more directly to the parking structure. The volunteer did not know that the route required going through a staff-only corridor. Vivian either did not hear the warning or did not care. When she stepped into the restricted hallway, she saw Daniela near Helen Ward's room. To a reasonable person, it would have looked like coincidence. To Vivian, it became proof of a story she had already invented. She saw the nurse who had refused her. She saw the same steady expression that had made her feel powerless downstairs. And in that moment, Vivian decided that Daniela's presence could not possibly be part of her work. It had to be defiance. Daniela noticed Vivian before Vivian spoke. She recognized the sound of expensive heels against the polished hospital floor. She turned and saw the woman standing near the restricted access sign, her face tense with anger. Daniela did not accuse her. She did not make a scene. She simply reminded Vivian that she was in a staff-only area and offered to help her return to the public corridor. That should have ended it. But Vivian had already crossed the line where reason mattered. She began raising her voice. She accused Daniela of following her. She suggested that Daniela had been waiting for a chance to embarrass her again. Her words were loud enough to draw attention from nearby rooms and the nurses' station. Daniela tried to keep the situation contained. She told Vivian that she was assigned to the third floor and had been there since being moved by administration. She said that the hallway was restricted for patient safety and that Vivian needed to leave the area. Vivian did not want an explanation. She wanted a target. She stepped closer. The air in the corridor seemed to change. People began to watch, but no one stepped forward. The orderly with the linens stopped near the wall. A respiratory therapist paused outside a room. Dr. Megan Blake emerged from the charting station with a look of concern, then hesitation. Vivian reached for Daniela's hospital badge. The motion was so sudden that Daniela barely had time to react. Vivian pulled the badge free from its clip, looked at Daniela's name, then held it as though it were proof that she had the right person. She accused Daniela of harassing a donor. She accused her of making threats. She accused her of disrespecting the hospital. None of it was true. Daniela did not shout back. She did not try to grab the badge. She did not even defend herself in the way Vivian seemed to expect. The restraint on Daniela's face only seemed to make Vivian angrier, because there was nothing she could use as evidence of aggression. So she created it. The slap came fast. It was hard enough to turn Daniela's head to the side. Helen Ward saw it from the doorway of her room. Dr. Megan Blake saw it from only a few feet away. The orderly saw it. The respiratory therapist saw it. The nurses near the station saw it. Several people saw the exact moment Vivian became the aggressor. And yet, in the first seconds afterward, no one said a word. Daniela slowly turned back toward Vivian. One hand rose to her cheek, not dramatically, not with anger, but almost as though she needed to confirm what had just happened. Vivian stood there breathing heavily, looking less ashamed than triumphant. She knew what her money had bought her in the past. She knew that people often chose safety over truth. Then Graham Mercer arrived. No one knew who had called him. Perhaps Vivian had done it herself. Perhaps someone at the front desk had already alerted his office. Either way, he appeared with the speed of a man who understood that a powerful donor in distress could become a public relations disaster. He walked into the corridor, took one look at Vivian, and went directly to her. He asked if she was all right. He asked if she needed medical attention. He asked if anyone had made her feel unsafe. He did not ask Daniela why her cheek was red. He did not ask why Vivian was standing in a restricted hallway. He did not ask the people who had witnessed the incident what they had seen. Vivian told Graham that Daniela had confronted her again. She claimed that the nurse had followed her upstairs and behaved aggressively. She implied that she had only reacted because she felt threatened. Graham listened as though every word were already proven. Then he turned to Daniela. His expression was not angry. That would have been easier to understand. It was colder than anger. It was the expression of someone who had decided that one employee's dignity was an acceptable price for protecting a donor relationship. He asked Daniela to hand over her badge. For the first time that day, something inside her seemed to shift. Not because she was guilty, not because she believed anyone had the right to treat her this way, but because she realized the hospital was not even pretending to care about the truth. She handed him the badge. Graham informed her that she was being placed on administrative leave pending review. He did not say that Vivian had struck her. He did not mention witnesses. He did not say an investigation would begin immediately. He used careful language about avoiding further disruption and preserving the hospital's reputation. Reputation. That was what mattered. Not the nurse who had been assaulted. Not the patients who had watched adults fail them. Not the message sent to every staff member in the hallway who now understood that doing the right thing could cost them their job if the wrong person became offended. Graham instructed Daniela to leave through the employee exit near the parking garage. He said it would be better than walking through the main lobby while the situation was still sensitive. Daniela understood the real reason. He wanted her gone quietly. He wanted Vivian protected from questions. And he wanted the hospital to appear calm, even if calm had to be built on a lie. As Daniela walked toward the back exit, she passed the same people who had watched Vivian strike her. Some looked ashamed. Some looked frightened. Some could not meet her eyes at all. Dr. Megan Blake stood near the nurse's station, holding the patient file so tightly that the edges bent beneath her fingers. She looked like she wanted to say something. Daniela could see it in her face, but Megan remained silent. Lillian Park, the charge nurse on duty, was not in the hallway when the slap happened. She arrived minutes later and saw only the aftermath. Daniela without her badge, Vivian surrounded by administrators, and Graham speaking in the low, controlled tone he used when he wanted people to stop asking questions. Lillian had worked at St. Alden for more than 20 years. She had watched Graham reward obedience and punish resistance. She had seen nurses move to undesirable shifts after speaking too openly in meetings. She had seen staff members blamed for problems created by budget cuts. She had learned to protect herself by staying careful. But when she saw Daniela walking toward the employee exit with one hand pressed lightly against her cheek, something in Lillian's carefully built silence began to crack. Daniela did not cry in the hallway. She waited until she reached the parking garage. Outside, the late afternoon sun had started to fade behind the city buildings. Ambulances still arrived at the emergency entrance on the other side of the hospital. From where Daniela stood, she could hear distant sirens and the faint hum of traffic. Life was continuing as though nothing had happened. Her phone felt heavy in her hand. For several minutes, she did not call anyone. She sat in her car without starting it, staring at the badge clip still attached to her uniform, even though the badge itself had been taken away. That small, empty piece of plastic seemed to say everything. 8 years of loyalty, reduced to an absence. Eventually, she called Samuel Reed. Samuel was not a politician. He was not a lawyer. He was not someone who enjoyed using his title to intimidate people. He was a physician, the director of emergency services for Horizon Medical Alliance, one of the largest regional health systems in the state. He had spent most of his career working in emergency medicine, where decisions had to be made quickly, and where the difference between arrogance and competence could mean the difference between life and death. He understood pressure. He understood grief. He understood that hospitals could be flawed places run by people who were too tired, too ambitious, or too afraid. But when Daniela told him what had happened, he did not interrupt her with promises of revenge. He listened. She told him about Vivian's appointment. She told him about the interstate accident. She told him how Graham had moved her because Vivian was angry. She told him about the restricted hallway, the stolen badge, the slap, the silence, and the order to leave through the back. By the time she finished, Samuel was quiet for a long moment. He knew Daniela well enough to understand that she would not exaggerate. She was not someone who turned every insult into a crisis. She had spent years standing up for patients without making herself the center of the story. So when she said she had been treated like a criminal for following triage rules, he believed her. But Samuel also knew something Daniela was too hurt to think about at that moment. The next morning, he was scheduled to visit St. Alden Regional as part of Horizon's preliminary evaluation of a possible merger. Horizon had been considering whether to bring St. Alden into its network, a move that could mean new equipment, expanded trauma services, financial stability, and access to a larger regional system. St. Alden wanted that merger badly. Graham Mercer wanted it badly too. Samuel did not tell Daniela that he would use the visit to punish anyone. He did not promise that Vivian would regret what she had done. He did not suggest that his title could erase the humiliation Daniela had suffered. Instead, he reminded her of something she had told countless patients and families over the years. When the truth matters, details matter. He encouraged her to write down everything while it was fresh. The timeline, the names of witnesses, the location, the words Graham used, the fact that Vivian had entered a restricted corridor, the fact that Daniela had been transferred to that floor by Graham himself. The fact that no one had asked her for a statement before taking her badge. Daniela spent most of the night doing exactly that. She wrote slowly at first, then more steadily. The more she recorded, the clearer the pattern became. This was not only about one woman losing her temper. It was about a hospital administrator who had chosen a donor over a nurse before the assault had even happened. By midnight, Daniela had completed a formal complaint. She included no dramatic language, no insults, no threats, only facts. The next morning, Graham Mercer arrived at St. Aldan, expecting to host an important meeting with Horizon Medical Alliance. He expected polished presentations, financial projections, and conversations about expansion. He expected to emphasize the hospital's strong community reputation and the promise of the pediatric wing the Hollis Foundation might help complete. Instead, he found Samuel Reed standing in the executive conference room. For a brief moment, Graham did not recognize him. Then he saw the name card on the table, and his face changed. Samuel was not there as Daniela's fiancé, at least not officially. He was there as Horizon's Director of Emergency Services and a senior member of the clinical evaluation team. Graham greeted him with the smooth confidence of an administrator who believed he still controlled the room. But Samuel's manner was different from what Graham expected. He was polite, professional, and calm. He asked about trauma capacity, staffing ratios, patient safety reporting, and the hospital's policies for protecting employees from workplace violence. At first, Graham answered as though the questions were routine. Then Samuel asked how St. Aldan handled incidents in which staff members reported being assaulted by patients, visitors, or donors. The room became still. Graham gave the standard answer. He spoke about zero tolerance. He mentioned reporting procedures, security protocols, and employee support services. Samuel listened without reacting. Then he asked whether those procedures had been followed the previous afternoon. Graham's confidence began to fade. He did not yet know the full extent of Daniela's complaint. He did not know how much Samuel knew. He did not know whether the matter had already reached Horizon's legal and ethics teams. But he understood one thing. The nurse he had sent out through the back exit was not going to disappear quietly. And somewhere inside the hospital, in a corridor filled with cameras no one had bothered to review, the truth was waiting. The truth did not arrive at St. Aldan Regional Hospital all at once. It came in pieces. First, it came through Daniela's written complaint, which was so precise that even Graham Mercer could not dismiss it as an emotional reaction. Daniela had documented the time Vivian Hollis arrived, the reason her procedure had been postponed, the fact that emergency resources had been diverted to victims of the interstate collision, and the order Graham gave to move her to the third floor. She listed the names of everyone she remembered seeing in the hallway after the assault. She described how Vivian had entered a restricted corridor, taken her badge, accused her of following her, and struck her in front of witnesses. Most importantly, Daniela included the part Graham had hoped she would leave out. She described how he had treated Vivian as the victim before anyone had even asked what happened. She described how he had taken her badge without hearing her account. She described how he had told her to leave through the employee exit, not because there was a safety concern, but because he wanted the incident to disappear before anyone in the main lobby had a chance to notice. Daniela did not use dramatic words. She did not call Graham corrupt. She did not call Vivian dangerous. She did not try to make herself sound heroic. She simply told the truth in the clearest way she knew how. And that was exactly what made the complaint difficult to bury. By mid-morning, the document had reached the hospital's Human Resources Department, the Internal Compliance Office, and the legal team responsible for reviewing workplace violence incidents. Normally, Graham would have found a way to slow the process down. He knew how institutions worked. He knew that paperwork could vanish into review cycles, that meetings could be postponed, and that people often became tired before the truth became inconvenient for the right people. But this time, the complaint had arrived on the same morning that Horizon Medical Alliance was evaluating St. Alden for a potential merger. That timing changed everything. Samuel Reed had already disclosed his personal relationship with Daniela to Horizon's ethics office before stepping into the conference room. He made it clear that he would not be involved in deciding whether Daniela's complaint was valid, whether discipline was appropriate, or whether the hospital should face legal consequences. He understood that Daniela deserved a fair investigation, not a favor disguised as justice. But he also made something else clear. Any hospital seeking to join Horizon's network would be evaluated not only on finances, equipment, and patient volume, but also on culture. A hospital could have polished floors, impressive fundraising brochures, and a long list of wealthy supporters, but none of that mattered if employees were afraid to report violence. None of it mattered if administrators allowed money to determine who received care and who received protection. To Samuel, the question was no longer whether St. Alden had a public relations problem. The question was whether St. Alden had a moral problem. Graham tried to answer with the language he knew best. He spoke about confusion. He mentioned that Vivian Hollis had felt threatened. He suggested that the situation had unfolded quickly and that everyone was still gathering facts. But the more carefully he spoke, the more obvious it became that he had never intended to gather facts at all. He had gathered influence. He had gathered fear. He had gathered the silence of people who believed that protecting themselves was safer than protecting the truth. Samuel did not argue with him. He did not need to. He simply asked that the meeting be paused while Horizon's clinical review team received an updated report on the hospital's employee safety policies, donor access procedures, and incident response records from the previous 12 months. That request sounded routine. For Graham, it was devastating, because St. Alden did have records, and records had a way of remembering what frightened people tried to forget. While the executive offices struggled to contain the growing problem, Lillian Park sat alone in a small staff lounge on the 3rd floor, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. She had worked at St. Alden long enough to know how these situations usually ended. The person with the least power became the easiest person to blame. The employee who followed policy was called difficult. The patient, donor, or executive who caused the harm was treated carefully, gently, almost respectfully, as though their status had transformed bad behavior into a misunderstanding. Lillian had seen it happen before. Years earlier, a surgical technician had reported that a visiting physician was verbally abusive towards staff. The technician had been told that he was too sensitive. Another time, a nurse complained that a board member's family member had entered a restricted unit after visiting hours. The nurse was quietly moved to a less desirable schedule 2 weeks later. No one said the transfer was punishment, but everyone understood why it happened. Lillian had never forgotten those moments. She had also never forgiven herself for surviving them by staying quiet. When she saw Daniela leaving through the employee exit the afternoon before, something inside her had broken open. Daniela had not been reckless. She had not been rude. She had not gone looking for conflict. She had simply done what nurses were trained to do: protect the people whose needs were most urgent. And for that, she had been humiliated. Lillian opened her work laptop and began searching through staffing records. At first, she only intended to confirm Daniela's transfer to the 3rd floor. But as she reviewed the scheduling logs, she found something else. The transfer order had not been entered through the normal staffing system. Graham had called it in directly to the shift supervisor, bypassing the usual documentation process. There was no written concern about Daniela's performance. No formal complaint from Vivian. No safety note. No record that Daniela had done anything wrong. There was only the abrupt transfer. Then Lillian found an email from 3 months earlier. It had been sent by Graham to a small group of department managers. The message was brief, but its meaning was unmistakable. It instructed staff to make reasonable accommodations for Vivian Hollis and her family whenever possible, especially when they visited the hospital for non-emergency care. The email did not openly say that Vivian should be allowed to skip triage rules. It was more careful than that, but the wording left little room for interpretation. Graham had encouraged staff to treat the Hollis family as exceptional. In a hospital, exceptional treatment could become dangerous very quickly. Lillian read the message 3 times. Then she forwarded it to the compliance office. She added a statement of her own. For the first time in years, she did not soften the truth. She explained that Graham's approach had created a culture in which employees believed powerful donors could complain their way around medical policy. She described how staff members had learned to avoid conflict with Vivian even when her requests were unreasonable. She admitted that she had not spoken up sooner because she feared retaliation. Her hands shook as she pressed send, but after the message disappeared from her screen, Lillian felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt lighter, not because the fear was gone, because she had finally stopped allowing fear to decide who she was. Across the hospital, Dr. Megan Blake was facing a different kind of battle. Megan had become a doctor because she believed medicine was an act of courage. She had imagined courage as the ability to work through exhaustion, make difficult diagnoses, deliver bad news, and stand steady when families were falling apart. She had not imagined that courage could also mean speaking when everyone around her was silent. The moment Vivian slapped Daniela had replayed in Megan's mind all night. Each time she remembered it, she saw something new. She saw the way Daniela had not moved toward Vivian. She saw the way Vivian grabbed the badge first. She saw the way Graham arrived and immediately turned his attention toward the woman with money instead of the nurse with a red mark across her face. Megan knew exactly what had happened, and she had said nothing. At first, she told herself that it was not her place. Then she told herself that security cameras would reveal the truth anyway. Then she told herself that she had patients to care for and could not risk creating more chaos. But beneath every excuse was the same ugly fact. She had been afraid. Megan had heard stories about Graham. Everyone had. She knew he had influence over staffing, promotions, and performance reviews. She knew he could make a person's work life miserable without ever saying anything that could be proven. But by the next morning, another thought had become impossible to ignore. Daniela had been afraid too, and Daniela had still done the right thing. Megan went to the compliance office and asked to provide a statement. At first, the investigator looked surprised. The official report from the previous day contained no mention of an assault. It only referred to a disagreement involving a donor and a staff member. But Megan spoke carefully and directly. She said she had witnessed Vivian strike Daniela. She said Daniela had not threatened Vivian or moved toward her. She said she saw Vivian pull Daniela's badge before the slap. Then Megan said the words that mattered most. She said that Graham had never asked her what she saw. The investigator wrote everything down. By early afternoon, the hallway that had been silent the day before was beginning to speak. Not loudly, not perfectly, but enough. The next witness came from a place no one expected. Mrs. Helen Ward had spent most of the day waiting for her daughter, who finally arrived after traffic from the interstate accident had eased. Helen had been tired, frightened, and overwhelmed by the hospital environment. But when she heard from a nurse that Daniela had been sent home after an incident, she immediately asked to speak with someone in charge. Helen did not know anything about Vivian Hollis. She did not know about the Hollis Foundation, the merger, or the executives meeting upstairs. She did not know Samuel Reed's title. She only knew what she had seen from her room. She told the investigator that Daniela had been kind to her when she felt alone. She described how the nurse had explained her condition, adjusted her blanket, and made sure she understood what was happening. Then she described the woman who entered the hallway, angry and loud. Helen said Vivian had accused Daniela before Daniela had even spoken. She said she remembered hearing Vivian claim that Daniela had followed her, but Helen knew that was impossible because Daniela had been on the floor long before Vivian arrived. She had seen Daniela checking on patients, speaking with nurses, and helping near the observation rooms. Helen's statement did more than confirm the assault. It destroyed the story Vivian had tried to create, because it established that Daniela had not been following anyone. She had been working. Meanwhile, the security department was reviewing the cameras. Graham had assumed the hallway footage would be unclear. He remembered that the third-floor corridor had been under renovation months earlier, and he believed the camera near the restricted access sign had been removed or turned at an angle that would not capture the confrontation. What he did not know was that the hospital had upgraded several cameras after a previous incident involving an unauthorized visitor. The system had been designed to store footage automatically on an external server, not on equipment controlled by the local administration. That meant no one inside St. Aldan could quietly erase it. The security supervisor, a man named Robert Kell, had worked at the hospital for 14 years. He was not easily impressed by wealthy visitors or executive pressure. His job had taught him that truth often looked different from the first story people told. When he reviewed the footage, he found exactly what everyone feared and hoped to see. Vivian entered the restricted corridor alone. Daniela was already there, assisting with patient care. Vivian approached Daniela first. Daniela did not chase her, threaten her, or block her way. She simply spoke to her from a respectful distance and gestured toward the public hallway. Then Vivian took Daniela's badge. Then Vivian slapped her. The camera did not capture every word clearly, but it captured enough. It captured the truth. Robert also pulled the access control logs. Vivian had not been authorized to enter the third-floor staff corridor. Daniela's badge had been scanned on that floor because Graham had ordered her transfer there. The timeline matched Daniela's complaint perfectly. The evidence was not emotional. It was not opinion. It was not influenced by money, fear, or reputation. It was time-stamped. And because it was time-stamped, it was almost impossible to deny. When the footage reached the compliance office, the tone of the investigation changed immediately. What had begun as a workplace complaint became a formal review of assault, retaliation, donor influence, and administrative misconduct. Vivian Hollis was contacted by the hospital's legal department and informed that the incident was under active investigation. At first, she reacted with disbelief. She insisted that Daniela had provoked her. She said she had felt threatened. She implied that the hospital was turning against her because a powerful outsider had become involved. But then she learned about the camera footage. For the first time, Vivian's certainty wavered. She had spent years believing that money protected her from consequences, not because she thought of herself as a villain, but because she had grown used to a world that rearranged itself around her. Restaurants found tables, offices returned calls. People apologized, even when she was the one who had behaved badly. She had mistaken accommodation for respect. She had mistaken fear for loyalty. And now, for the first time in a very long time, she was discovering that neither could change a recording. Graham Mercer reacted differently. Vivian was angry. Graham was terrified. He knew the video alone could end his career. But the deeper investigation threatened to expose more than one bad decision. As compliance officers reviewed emails, staffing records, donor access notes, and executive communications, they began to see a pattern. Graham had not merely tried to protect Vivian after the assault. He had been protecting her for years. The record showed that Vivian and her family had received access to appointment slots outside normal scheduling procedures. On several occasions, staff had been pressured to move other patients, sometimes without clear medical reasons. There were emails where Graham described the Hollis family as essential to the hospital's future and encouraged managers to avoid upsetting them under any circumstances. He had never written the words that made the arrangement illegal. He was too careful for that. But the intent was everywhere, in the unusually fast responses to Vivian's complaints, in the special treatment notes hidden inside administrative emails, in the way staff members were warned to be flexible whenever the Hollis name appeared, in the way Daniela had been moved without documentation, and in the way Graham had tried to send her out through the back door before anyone could ask questions. The investigation revealed something else that made the board even more alarmed. The Hollis Foundation had not actually completed the donation it had promised for the pediatric expansion. The public announcement had created the impression that the money was secure, but much of the pledge was still tied to conditions, deadlines, and naming rights negotiations. Graham had been behaving as though St. Alden already owed Vivian everything. In reality, the hospital had been bending itself around money it had not even received. That fact changed the atmosphere inside the boardroom. For months, the trustees had feared that challenging Vivian would jeopardize the hospital's future. But now they had to consider a harder question. What kind of future did they have if they allowed people with money to control medical decisions? By the end of the second day, the board called an emergency meeting. It was not public, not at first. The hospital's lawyers advised caution. There were employment laws, privacy concerns, possible criminal charges, and contractual obligations to review. But everyone in the room understood that the situation had moved beyond internal discipline. Daniela was invited to attend with a representative from the Nursing Association. She did not want Samuel beside her at the table, not because she did not appreciate him, but because she wanted the board to see her clearly, not as someone's fiancé, not as the person connected to Horizon Medical Alliance, not as a symbol of embarrassment for the hospital. She wanted them to see her as what she had always been, a nurse who had done her job. The meeting took place in a conference room on the top floor, a space with glass walls overlooking the city. It was the kind of room where people discussed budgets, expansion plans, and public image. On the walls hung framed photographs of groundbreaking ceremonies and smiling donors holding oversized checks. Daniela noticed those photographs when she entered. For a moment, she wondered how many people in those pictures had ever considered what happened to the staff members who made their institutions function every day. The nurses who stayed late, the technicians who kept equipment running, the housekeeping staff who cleaned rooms after tragedy, the receptionists who absorbed anger from frightened families, the people whose names never appeared on plaques. Vivian sat near the opposite end of the table with her attorney. She looked composed, but her confidence was different now. The sharp certainty from the hallway was gone. She had read the investigation summary. She knew the footage existed. She knew the witnesses had spoken. She knew that the hospital no longer needed to choose between protecting its employees and protecting a donor, because the donor had become the very thing the hospital needed protection from. Graham sat several seats away. He looked smaller than Daniela remembered. Not physically, but in presence. The man who had once controlled the hallway with a few cold instructions now kept his hands folded in front of him, as though he could make himself less visible by becoming still. The board chair began by summarizing the findings. She spoke in careful, formal language. She described the documented assault. She described the improper suspension of Daniela without investigation. She described the failure to follow workplace violence procedures. She described the evidence that donor influence had affected staffing and patient access decisions. Then she spoke about institutional responsibility. That was the moment the room changed. Because until then, the case could have been treated as a conflict between Vivian and Daniela. But the board chair made it clear that it was not. The failure belonged to the system. Vivian had committed the assault. Graham had enabled the cover-up. But the hospital had created the conditions in which both believed they could act without consequences. The chair then invited Daniela to speak. Daniela stood slowly. She had prepared notes, but when she looked around the room, she realized she did not want to read them. She did not want her words to sound rehearsed. She wanted the people who had spent 2 days discussing liability and reputation to understand what the event had felt like from the inside. She explained that she had worked at St. Alden for 8 years because she believed in the hospital's mission. She had cared for patients who could not pay, patients who had no family, patients who arrived angry because fear had made them feel helpless. She had never expected every day to be easy. She understood that hospitals were stressful places, but she said there was a difference between stress and injustice. She said the slap hurt, but it was not the part she would remember most. What she would remember was looking around afterward and seeing people who knew the truth choose silence because they believed the truth would not protect them. She said that no employee should have to wonder whether their safety depends on the social status of the person hurting them. She said that no patient should have to wait longer because someone wealthy believes their comfort matters more than another person's survival. And she said that no hospital should call itself a place of healing while allowing fear to become part of its culture. Daniela did not ask for revenge. She asked for change. She asked for a policy that protected employees from violence, regardless of who caused it. She asked for a clear process that prevented donors, executives, or board members from interfering with clinical triage. She asked for a confidential reporting system so witnesses could speak without fearing retaliation. And she asked for training that would teach staff what to do when they saw harm happening in front of them. When she finished, no one applauded. It was not that kind of room. But the silence this time was different. It was not fear. It was shame. Vivian's attorney spoke next. He attempted to frame the assault as an isolated lapse in judgment. He emphasized Vivian's years of charitable work, her contributions to the city, and the stress of the moment. He suggested that she had become overwhelmed after being told her procedure was delayed. But the argument sounded weak against the evidence. Stress did not explain entering a restricted corridor. Stress did not explain taking Daniela's badge. Stress did not explain inventing a false story. And stress certainly did not explain why Vivian expected the hospital to punish the woman she had struck. When Vivian finally spoke, she did not offer a full apology. Not yet. She said she regretted that the situation had escalated. She said she never intended for Daniela to be harmed. She said she had felt ignored and disrespected. But even in that moment, she still spoke as though the greatest injury had happened to her. Daniela watched quietly. She understood something Vivian did not. An apology that begins with self-pity is not an apology. It is another attempt to avoid accountability. The board adjourned for private deliberation. The decision took several hours. During that time, Samuel remained outside the process. Horizon's legal team had advised him not to participate in any decision involving Daniela directly, and he respected that boundary. But he sat with her in a quiet waiting area near the executive offices, not speaking much, not trying to solve anything, simply making sure she did not have to face the day alone. At one point, Daniela asked him whether he thought the board would actually do the right thing. Samuel did not answer with certainty. He had worked in healthcare long enough to know that institutions often changed slowly, even when the truth was obvious. He knew that board members worried about lawsuits, public image, donor relationships, and financial stability. He knew that people sometimes chose the least painful option instead of the right one. But he told her something else. Whatever the board decided, the truth had already changed the hospital. The hallway was no longer silent. The witnesses had spoken. The footage existed. The emails existed. And once people had seen how fear had shaped their choices, they could not pretend they had not seen it. Late that afternoon, the board called everyone back into the conference room. The chair read the decisions one by one. Vivian Hollis was immediately banned from all non-emergency access to St. Alden Regional Hospital. She would no longer be permitted to visit the hospital as a donor, guest, or member of any advisory group. Her foundation's naming rights agreement for the pediatric expansion was terminated. The board also voted to return all unused funds tied to the naming arrangement rather than allow the hospital's future to remain connected to her influence. For Vivian, it was a blow unlike anything she had experienced. Her name had always opened doors. Now it was being removed from one. The board also confirmed that the hospital would cooperate fully with law enforcement regarding the assault. The security footage and witness statements were turned over to the district attorney's office. Vivian's wealth could hire attorneys. It could delay some things. It could soften some public embarrassment. But it could not make the video disappear. Graham Mercer was suspended immediately pending termination proceedings. The board cited his failure to protect an employee, his improper handling of the incident, his retaliation against Daniela, and his repeated use of donor influence to interfere with hospital operations. A separate audit would review every case in which special treatment had been given to high-profile donors or board-connected individuals. For Graham, the punishment was more painful than losing a title. He had built his career around being indispensable. He had convinced himself that he was protecting the hospital by keeping powerful people happy. He had told himself that compromises were necessary, that everyone benefited from the money, that someone had to manage difficult personalities. But now the truth was impossible to avoid. He had not protected the hospital. He had weakened it. He had taught staff that policy could be bought. He had taught donors that influence came before ethics. And he had helped create the exact environment that allowed Vivian Hollis to believe she could strike a nurse and walk away untouched. Daniela was formally reinstated with full back pay for the time she had been placed on leave. The board issued a written apology, acknowledging that the hospital had failed to protect her. It also committed to establishing a new Employee Safety and Witness Protection Council, led jointly by frontline staff and independent compliance officers. Daniela was asked to help design the program. At first, she hesitated. She did not want a title given to her as a gesture. She did not want to become a symbol used in a press release and forgotten once the headlines faded. She wanted assurance that the council would have real authority, real reporting channels, and real protection for employees who spoke up. The board agreed. Lillian Park would serve beside her. Dr. Megan Blake volunteered to help create mandatory training for physicians and staff on bystander intervention, workplace violence, and ethical escalation. The program would teach people how to document incidents, how to intervene safely, and how to report retaliation without losing their jobs. For Megan, it was not enough to say she was sorry. She wanted to make sure the next person in her position would know what courage looked like before it was too late. Helen Ward received a letter from the board thanking her for her statement. She laughed when her daughter read it aloud, saying that she had only said what anyone should say when they see someone being treated badly. But that was exactly why her statement mattered. Helen had no title, no influence, no professional obligation. She had simply chosen not to look away. The criminal case against Vivian moved more slowly than the hospital investigation. Legal processes often did. Months passed. News outlets reported on the suspension of Graham Mercer and the termination of the Hollis naming agreement. Public reaction was divided at first. Some people praised the hospital for acting. Others argued that Vivian's years of charity should not be erased by one terrible moment. But the security footage changed the conversation. Once people saw what had happened, it became difficult to describe it as a misunderstanding. Vivian eventually accepted a plea agreement on a misdemeanor assault charge. She was ordered to complete community service at a nonprofit medical clinic, attend a behavioral accountability program, and remain away from Daniela. The court also required her to make a financial contribution to an independent employee safety fund, though Daniela made it clear that she did not want the money treated as forgiveness. No amount could undo what happened, but it could help protect someone else. Vivian's community service was not glamorous. The nonprofit clinic served people who had no insurance, people who worked multiple jobs, people who delayed care because they could not afford it, and people who had spent years being treated as invisible by systems that were supposed to help them. For the first time in her life, Vivian had to stand in a place where no one cared about her family name. She was not introduced as a donor. She was not given special access. She was asked to organize supplies, prepare waiting areas, help with basic administrative tasks, and listen when patients needed directions. At first, she resented it. She moved through the clinic with the stiff posture of someone who believed she had been unfairly reduced. But week after week, she saw people waiting patiently for care they could not afford. She saw exhausted mothers trying to keep children calm. She saw elderly patients apologizing for asking too many questions. She saw nurses working through lunch because there were too many people to help. And slowly, painfully, she began to understand something she had never understood before. Being treated with dignity was not a privilege. It was the minimum every person deserved. Whether Vivian truly changed was something no one could know immediately. Real change was not proven by one apology, one court order, or one act of public humility. It was proven over time, through choices made when no cameras were watching and no consequences were guaranteed. But one thing was certain: she would never again walk into St. Aldan Regional believing the building belonged to her. As for Graham Mercer, the investigation continued long after he left the hospital. The audit uncovered several other cases in which employees had been pressured to accommodate donors in ways that compromised policy. Some incidents were small, others were more serious. In every case, the pattern was the same. Graham had treated the hospital's ethical boundaries as flexible whenever money was involved. He lost his position, his influence, and the trust he had spent years pretending to earn. No one sent him out through a back exit. No one needed to. His choices had already made every door close. Months later, St. Aldan Regional Hospital began to change in visible ways. New signs appeared near staff entrances and waiting areas, clearly stating that violence against healthcare workers would not be tolerated, regardless of a visitor's status, connections, or financial contributions. A confidential reporting line was created. Security procedures were strengthened. Donor relations were separated from clinical decision-making. No executive could move a staff member or interfere with triage without written documentation and independent review. The changes did not erase the past, but they made it harder for the past to repeat itself. Daniela returned to work gradually. Her first day back on the 3rd floor was harder than she expected. She had told herself that she was ready, but when she stepped into the same corridor where Vivian had slapped her body remembered before her mind did. The polished floor, the restricted access sign, the sound of carts rolling in the distance, everything brought the moment back. For a few seconds, she stood still. Then Lillian appeared beside her. She did not say anything dramatic. She simply stood there, close enough to remind Daniela that she was no longer alone. Soon after, Megan joined them. She looked nervous but determined. She had spent the past few weeks helping develop the first staff workshop on intervention and reporting. She told Daniela that the session had filled faster than expected. Nurses, doctors, technicians, and support staff had all signed up. People wanted to learn. People wanted to do better. Daniela looked down the hallway. The same place that had once witnessed silence was now becoming part of a different story. Not a perfect story. Not one where everyone suddenly became brave, but one where fear was no longer allowed to be the final answer. Over time, Daniela became known for more than what had happened to her. She became one of the strongest voices in the new Employee Safety Council. She listened to staff members who had been afraid to report harassment. She helped younger nurses understand that professionalism did not mean accepting abuse. She worked with administrators to make sure policies were not just words on paper. And every time someone told her they were afraid to speak up, she remembered the hallway. She remembered the badge being pulled from her uniform. She remembered the sting of Vivian's hand. But more than anything, she remembered the silence. Because silence had been the true enemy. Not only Vivian's arrogance, not only Graham's corruption, not even the hospital's fear of losing money. The real danger had been the moment when decent people saw wrong happening and convinced themselves that it was safer not to get involved. Daniela understood that courage did not always look dramatic. It did not always arrive with power, influence, or a perfect speech. Sometimes it looked like an older patient giving an honest statement. Sometimes it looked like a doctor admitting that she had been afraid. Sometimes it looked like a nurse forwarding an email she had kept hidden for months. And sometimes it looked like a person refusing to let humiliation turn them into silence. One afternoon, nearly a year after the incident, Daniela stood near the emergency department entrance as another busy shift began. The hospital was crowded again. Ambulances arrived. Families waited. Nurses moved quickly between rooms. The work had not become easier. Hospitals were still complicated places. People were still tired. Mistakes still happened. But something fundamental had changed. A young nurse approached Daniela after dealing with an angry visitor who had shouted at her near the waiting room. The nurse looked shaken. In the past, she might have apologized for causing trouble. She might have tried to handle it alone. Instead, she reported it. Security responded. A supervisor documented the incident. Other staff members stood beside her. It was a small moment. Most people would never hear about it. But Daniela watched the young nurse walk away, knowing she had been protected. And she felt something settle inside her. That was what justice looked like after the headlines faded. Not only punishment, not only public shame, but a world made safer because someone refused to accept what used to be normal. The day Vivian Hollis slapped Daniela Cruz, she believed she was punishing a nurse for forgetting her place. What she did not understand was that Daniela had never forgotten her place. Daniela's place was beside patients who needed care, beside co-workers who needed protection, beside the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. And in the end, the woman who thought the hospital belonged to her learned the lesson she had spent a lifetime avoiding. Money can buy attention. It can buy access. It can even buy silence for a while. But it cannot buy the right to take another person's dignity. And when enough people finally choose to speak, even the most powerful lie begins to fall apart. If you believe no one should have to stand alone against injustice, share your thoughts in the comments. And remember this: sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not look away.
Escort her out. Now.
Rose was being thrown out.
Do not let her speak to the bride.
Grant wanted her silenced. Maya saw everything.
Aunt Rose! What is happening?
Give me the box, and this ends quietly.
The box terrified him.
Let her go.
Do not sign anything. You need to hear the truth. That man is lying to you, Maya.
Your grandmother knew exactly who you would become.
Security will handle her.
His mother helped hide it.
Tell me the truth.
His grandmother left this for you. The twin sharks.
16 months earlier, it all seemed impossible. At 31, Maya had built a life that looked ordinary from the outside and meaningful to anyone who knew her. She taught at a public school on the east side of Briarwood, where she worked with children whose families had learned to measure time in appointments, bus schedules, and insurance denials. Her classroom was full of picture cards, weighted blankets, chipped tables, and little victories that never made the news. Maya knew the names of every child who hated loud rooms, every parent who had learned to apologize for arriving late, and every student who had been told, directly or indirectly, that their needs were too expensive. She had not grown up with much. Her mother, Lila, had been a reading specialist who believed that every child deserved at least one adult who saw potential before behavior. When Lila died suddenly after a brief illness, Maya was 14. Rose, Lila's older sister, had taken her in without speeches or conditions. Rose had worked night shifts as a home care nurse then, and money was always tight. But Maya never remembered feeling unwanted. She remembered packed lunches, secondhand books, birthday cakes that leaned to one side, and a woman who would stay awake until dawn after a double shift just to make sure Maya had finished her homework. Rose never pretended their life was glamorous. She taught Maya how to repair a hem, how to stretch soup across 3 dinners, how to recognize when someone was treating kindness as weakness. There was one lesson, however, that Maya had never fully understood. Rose believed that the people most eager to be admired were often the people least willing to be known. Maya used to think it was simply the wisdom of someone who had spent decades in strangers' homes, watching families perform love for visitors and abandon it when the doors closed. Then Grant Holloway arrived at her school with a camera crew, a group of foundation staff, and a donation large enough to replace the classroom equipment Maya had spent years begging the district to approve. The Holloway Foundation had been a familiar name in Briarwood for as long as Maya could remember. It funded scholarships, literacy centers, hospital wings, and polished advertisements about lifting communities through opportunity. Its founder, Eleanor Holloway, had been remembered as a stern but generous woman who turned a small family business into a philanthropic empire. After Eleanor's death, the foundation passed into the hands of her daughter, Catherine, and her grandson, Grant. They appeared in magazines, stood beside oversized checks, and spoke often about legacy. Grant entered Maya's classroom in a tailored suit that did not quite belong among finger paint and sensory toys. Yet he seemed to know exactly how to make himself fit. He knelt beside a student who had trouble making eye contact. He listened, while Maya explained why a new communications device could change a child's day. He asked questions that made her believe he had actually read the proposal rather than simply approved it. By the end of the visit, he had promised not only the devices, but a small grant for teacher training across the district. Maya was careful at first. She had seen wealthy people arrive with announcements and leave before the real work began. But Grant kept returning. He attended school board meetings. He remembered the names of students. He sent handwritten notes after difficult weeks. And when he asked Maya to dinner, he did it without making her feel like a charitable project he had decided to rescue. Their relationship moved quickly, though not carelessly. Grant took Maya to quiet restaurants rather than the places reporters followed him. He listened when she talked about her students, even when the stories had no easy ending. He seemed to admire that she did not chase his money or his family name. In fact, he often said that being with her felt like stepping outside the world that expected something from him every minute of the day. Rose did not share Maya's confidence. She was polite to Grant, never openly hostile, but she watched him in a way that made him uncomfortable. She noticed how his generosity increased when a camera was nearby. She noticed that he asked Maya to send photographs whenever a new device arrived at school, then later claimed those photographs had inspired the foundation's latest campaign. She noticed the small pauses in his expression when Maya disagreed with him, the faint tightening around his mouth when anyone failed to admire him quickly enough. Still, Rose said little. Maya had spent most of her life being underestimated because of where she came from. Rose did not want to become another person, telling her that happiness was too fragile for someone like them to trust. So she kept her concerns to herself, hoping she was wrong. For a while, it seemed she might be. Grant proposed on a winter evening beneath the lights of a small botanical garden that had been closed to the public for the night. There were no journalists, no celebrity friends, no branded banners. Maya believed that was proof the moment belonged only to them. When she said yes, Grant held her as though he had been waiting his whole life for someone who did not care about the Holloway name. The engagement changed the temperature around them almost immediately. Catherine Holloway began appearing more often, always elegant, always measured, always able to make a criticism sound like concern. She offered to manage the wedding because, as she gently suggested, a marriage into the Holloway family attracted attention, and attention required care. She selected the chapel, the guest list, the flowers, the menus, and eventually most of the people allowed to have an opinion. At first, Maya accepted this as generosity. She had never planned a wedding and did not want to be ungrateful. But Catherine's help came with a quiet process of removal. Maya's co-workers were shifted to a distant table because the room was limited. Rose was advised that a smaller family dinner before the ceremony might be more comfortable than the main reception. A photo of Maya's mother, which Maya wanted near the ceremony flowers, was described as too personal for the visual plan. Each decision seemed minor by itself. Together, They made Maya feel less like a bride and more like a detail being arranged. Grant always found a way to smooth it over. He told Maya his mother had spent her life managing public attention and did not know how to stop. He promised that once the wedding was over, they would build a life with fewer expectations and more space. Maya wanted to believe him. Every time doubt appeared, she reminded herself of the man who had sat on the floor of her classroom and listened to a child struggle to form one sentence. Rose, however, recognized something Maya did not. She had seen Catherine Holloway before, though Maya had never known it. Nearly 20 years earlier, Rose had worked as a private nurse for Eleanor Holloway during the final season of Eleanor's life. By then, Eleanor was no longer the towering public figure people admired from newspaper photographs. She was ill, exhausted, and increasingly troubled by things happening inside the foundation that carried her name. Rose had been hired because Eleanor wanted someone outside the family. She had told the agency that she needed a nurse who could be trusted not to confuse employment with loyalty to Catherine or Grant. Rose had not understood the significance of that request until the nights when Eleanor could not sleep. On those nights, the old woman spoke less about death than betrayal. She had built the Holloway Foundation to keep children from being discarded by systems that found them inconvenient. Yet she had begun to suspect that her own family was using the foundation as a stage set, moving money through polished programs while the people in greatest need were removed from the picture. Eleanor never gave Rose every detail. She was too careful for that. But she did ask Rose to keep a cedar box hidden where Catherine would never think to look. She told her that the box contained what mattered if the family ever tried to turn compassion into a costume. Rose had promised without understanding how expensive that promise would become. After Eleanor died, Catherine claimed that the final estate documents had been settled. The foundation continued, and Grant grew into its public face. Rose received no invitation to the funeral reception. She kept the box in the back of a linen cabinet for years, telling herself that perhaps the danger Eleanor feared had passed. Then Grant began dating Maya. The first warning came 6 weeks before the wedding, when Rose visited Maya's apartment and found a stack of documents waiting to be signed. Maya had been told they were standard papers connected to her future role at the foundation. Grant wanted her to become the public education ambassador after the honeymoon. He said her work with children made her the perfect person to lead a new initiative. Rose read only a few pages before her hands began to shake. Buried beneath language about reputation, privacy, and coordinated communication was a clause preventing Maya from making public statements about foundation activities without written approval. There were financial penalties, confidentiality rules, and restrictions that would follow her even if she stepped away from the role. It was not a partnership agreement, it was a leash. That night, Rose went home, opened the linen cabinet, and took out the cedar box for the first time in almost 2 decades. Inside, beneath a yellowing knit scarf Eleanor had once used to wrap the documents, were pages bearing the old woman's signature, a sealed letter addressed to Rose, and a thin ledger written in a disciplined hand. The first page of the letter made one thing painfully clear. Eleanor had not asked Rose to protect a fortune. She had asked her to protect people. And if the day came when a Holloway tried to use marriage, charity, or public admiration to silence someone vulnerable, Rose was to make sure the truth reached the light. Rose had no idea how close that day was until the morning of Maya's wedding. The morning of the wedding arrived under a hard, bright sky that made every window of the Holloway estate shine. By 7 o'clock, the chapel garden was already filled with florists, caterers, stylists, photographers, and assistants carrying clipboards. The place looked less like a home than a machine built to manufacture a perfect memory. Every rose had been inspected. Every candle had been placed at the correct height. Every place card had been checked twice. And in the center of it all, Maya was being prepared to marry the man everyone insisted had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. Rose arrived alone just after 9. She wore the blue dress Maya had helped her choose, a simple coat against the morning chill, and the old cedar box tucked inside a canvas bag. She had spent the night reading Eleanor's letter until the words blurred. There was no instruction telling her to interrupt a wedding, no sentence ordering her to humiliate Grant or expose the family in front of strangers. Eleanor had only asked her to act before another innocent person became part of a lie. That difference mattered to Rose. She did not want revenge. She did not even want to ruin Grant. What frightened her was the thought of Maya spending years trying to understand why the man she loved had slowly taken control of her voice, her work, and her memories of what was right. Rose had watched that happen to women before. It rarely began with cruelty that anyone else could see. It began with decisions made on their behalf, concerns dismissed as stress, and gratitude demanded in exchange for a comfortable cage. Catherine saw Rose before Maya did. Her eyes moved to the canvas bag, then to Rose's shoes, then to the anxious way Rose searched the corridor for someone who could take her to the bridal room. Catherine greeted her with polished restraint, but the message beneath her manners was immediate. Rose had not been expected to arrive so early, and the family could not allow distractions on a day meant to be photographed from every angle. Rose asked to speak with Maya privately. Catherine explained that the bride was overwhelmed and could not be disturbed. Rose said the matter could not wait. Catherine's expression barely changed, but she sent an assistant to find Grant. Grant appeared several minutes later in his formal suit, surrounded by the calm authority of someone accustomed to people making space for him. At first, he treated Rose like an inconvenience that could be managed. He suggested she give Maya the box after the ceremony. He reminded her that the bride had enough emotions to handle. He implied that an old family matter could surely wait until the guests had gone home. Then Rose told him that the box had belonged to Eleanor. The change in Grant was small, but Rose had spent enough years at bedsides to recognize the body's betrayal of the mind. His shoulders tightened. His gaze dropped toward the bag and returned too quickly. For a moment, the careful warmth in his face disappeared. He asked Rose what exactly Eleanor had given her. Rose did not answer. She only said that Maya needed to see it before signing anything connected to the Holloway Foundation. That was when Grant stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. He spoke to Rose in the low, controlled manner of a man who knew anger would look bad if anyone overheard. He suggested that grief could distort old memories. He implied that she might be confused by documents she did not understand. He warned her that upsetting Maya on her wedding day would be unforgivable. Rose had heard sharper words in hospital rooms, usually from families who had mistaken fear for authority. She told him that a person who feared the truth before a marriage had no right to ask for trust after it. Grant's face hardened. He did not order the guards to remove her immediately. Not then. He knew that would draw attention. Instead, he asked one of Catherine's assistants to escort Rose to a side lounge and promised that Maya would join her when she was ready. It was a softer form of exile, designed to look considerate. For 20 minutes, Rose sat alone in a room decorated with cream-colored furniture she was afraid to touch. Outside the door, footsteps passed without stopping. The wedding moved forward as though she had already been erased from it. She could hear distant music being tested in the chapel and the low murmur of guests arriving. With every minute, she felt the old weight of hesitation return. Perhaps Maya deserved a quiet day. Perhaps Rose was about to damage the one thing her niece had allowed herself to want. Then she remembered Lila. She remembered Maya at 14, trying to be brave at a funeral because she thought crying would make Rose's burden heavier. She remembered every time Maya had stood up for a child who had been treated as difficult rather than deserving. And she realized that protecting Maya's peace by hiding the truth was not protection at all. It was surrender. Rose left the lounge and headed toward the bridal corridor. The assistant tried to stop her. Rose apologized and kept walking. Catherine saw her approaching and immediately understood what was happening. Grant had just taken his place near the chapel entrance, where the first guests could see him. To anyone watching, he looked composed and proud. But when Rose reached the corridor, his composure cracked. Maya was only a few doors away, surrounded by bridesmaids and makeup artists. She heard raised voices, then stepped into the hall before someone could close the door. Her wedding dress caught the morning light, and for a second, Rose saw the little girl she had raised, dressed for a future Rose had once believed would be safe. Grant moved between them. He told Maya that Rose was tired and upset, that she had become confused about an old matter related to his grandmother. He made it sound merciful, as though he were protecting both women from embarrassment. Maya looked at Rose, waiting for her aunt to deny it or explain. Rose tried to reach into the bag. Grant caught her wrist. It was not a violent movement. That was what made it worse. It was quick, controlled, almost invisible. But Maya saw it. She saw the way Rose flinched. She saw the anger in Grant's eyes before he replaced it with concern. And something inside her shifted. Grant released Rose immediately and tried to draw Maya away from the moment. He reminded her that hundreds of guests were arriving. He spoke about timing, pressure, and how much stress Rose must be under. He made the entire situation sound like a fragile inconvenience that Maya had the duty to manage. Maya asked Rose whether she needed help. Rose looked at her, then at Grant, and made a decision that broke her own heart. She told Maya that she did, but that the truth could not be spoken in a hallway full of people who wanted it hidden. Catherine called security. What happened next was the moment that would later be described in different ways by every person who had witnessed it. Some guests would say Rose refused to cooperate. Others would insist the guards were only guiding her outside. Catherine would claim the family had been concerned for Rose's well-being. Grant would tell anyone who listened that he had tried to protect Maya from a painful misunderstanding. But Maya remembered the facts. She remembered Rose clutching the cedar box. She remembered the guards treating a 68-year-old woman as though dignity were something that could be removed by force. She remembered Grant watching instead of stopping them. And she remembered the hollow feeling that came when a person she loved showed her, without realizing it, who they were. Rose was taken through the side doors and into the driveway. The music inside the chapel swelled. The wedding coordinator hurried Maya toward the room where she was supposed to wait until the processional. Everyone spoke at once, telling her there was no need to worry, no need to ruin the day. No need to let Rose's confusion become a disaster. Maya let them lead her for several steps. Then she stopped. The word disaster lingered in her mind. It was the same word Grant had used 3 weeks earlier when one of his foundation employees had tried to meet with him after being dismissed. Maya had asked what happened, and Grant had said the employee was creating a disaster because she had misunderstood how professional organizations worked. At the time, Maya had accepted the explanation. Now she remembered the coldness behind it. She looked down at her hands and noticed something folded beneath the white ribbon of her bouquet. Rose must have slipped it there when Grant had grabbed her wrist. It was a single page torn from Eleanor's letter. Maya read it in the quiet of the preparation room while her bridesmaids watched her face change. The handwriting was weak but clear. Eleanor had written that there were people who called themselves guardians of a legacy while feeding on the very trust they were supposed to protect. She had written that the family's greatest danger was not scandal, but the habit of teaching others to confuse wealth with virtue. And near the bottom of the page, she had left a warning addressed not to Maya by name, but to whoever might one day be asked to marry into the Holloway world. Never sign away your voice in exchange for a place at their table. Maya read the sentence twice. Then she asked her bridesmaids to leave. For the first time all morning, no one told her what the next step should be. Outside, Grant was taking his place near the altar. He believed Rose had been removed. He believed the box was still in her hands, but far enough away to handle after the ceremony. He believed Maya had been surrounded by enough pressure, beauty, and expectation to keep her moving forward. He did not understand that the best thing Rose had ever given Maya was not shelter, food, or even love. It was the ability to recognize the moment when silence became a betrayal. Maya removed her veil, not because she had decided anything yet, but because she needed to see clearly. Then she left the room through the service hallway, past the floral displays and polished mirrors, and walked toward the driveway where Rose was waiting beside the car that had brought her there. The ceremony had not begun, but the marriage was already over. Rose was sitting on the low stone wall near the estate driveway when Maya found her. The security men had stepped back once they realized the bride was walking toward them, but they remained close enough to remind Rose that even outside the chapel, the Holloway family believed they could decide where she belonged. For a few seconds, neither woman spoke. Maya stood in her wedding dress without a veil, carrying a bouquet she no longer knew what to do with. Rose looked smaller than she had that morning, not because she was weak, but because the years of keeping Eleanor's secret had suddenly become visible in the curve of her shoulders. Maya sat beside her and reached for the cedar box. Rose did not hand it over immediately. She asked Maya to understand that whatever happened next had to be Maya's choice. Rose had not come to command her, to punish Grant, or to turn one terrible morning into the only definition of Maya's life. She had come because a marriage could survive disappointment, fear, even ordinary mistakes. It could not survive a foundation built on contempt. Then she opened the box. Inside was the original third codicil to Eleanor Holloway's will, signed before 2 independent witnesses and sealed by a small legal practice outside Briarwood. It had never appeared in the estate papers Catherine presented after Eleanor died. The document did not take every dollar from the Holloway family or hand Rose some secret fortune. Its purpose was more precise. Eleanor had placed the voting control of the foundation into a protective trust to be activated if a member of her family used the organization to conceal fraud, retaliate against employees, or coerce another person into surrendering their voice for the sake of the Holloway name. Rose had also kept a ledger Eleanor compiled during the last months of her life. It tracked grants that were publicly announced, but never fully delivered. Contracts redirected through companies controlled by Catherine's friends, and scholarships that disappeared from internal lists after the cameras had gone. The final pages contained names. They were not the names of powerful people. They belonged to teachers, community coordinators, social workers, and former foundation employees who had tried to raise concerns and had been quietly pushed out. There was one name Maya recognized at once. It belonged to a woman named Helena Ward, a former director of the Holloway Education Initiative. 3 weeks earlier, Grant had called Helena a disgruntled employee who had tried to create problems after losing her position. Maya had believed him because she wanted to believe him. But the ledger showed that Helena had objected to funds being moved out of school programs and into a marketing campaign designed around Grant's public image. Her dismissal had not been a misunderstanding. It had been retaliation. At the bottom of the box lay the agreement Grant wanted Maya to sign after the wedding. Rose had found a copy among documents left at Maya's apartment. Eleanor's letter explained why it mattered. Grant was not simply inviting Maya to become an ambassador for the foundation. He wanted her to become the moral face of a new campaign while binding her to confidentiality terms that would make it difficult for her to speak if she discovered what the family had done. Maya held the papers in her lap. The chapel bells began to ring behind them, a signal that the ceremony should be starting. For years, she had thought love meant believing in the best version of someone until they proved otherwise. But looking at the documents, she understood that Grant had already proved otherwise. She had simply been given reasons to look away. Rose told her there was one more thing Maya needed to know. Before coming to the wedding, Rose had sent copies of every document to the legal practice named in Eleanor's codicil and to the 3 independent trustees Eleanor had selected long ago. Rose had delayed for years because the evidence alone had not been enough to show the full pattern. But Grant's attempt to bind Maya to silence, combined with his treatment of Rose that morning, had made the pattern impossible to deny. Maya could not undo what Grant had done. She could not bring back the employees who had lost their jobs, or the children whose programs had been cut while the Holloways posed for photographs. But she could refuse to become the next polished layer over the truth. She stood and took Rose's hand. When they walked back into the chapel, the guests turned toward them with the curiosity of people who had waited too long without an explanation. Grant was at the altar beneath an arch of white flowers, looking composed, but increasingly irritated. Catherine sat in the front row, her face fixed in the expression of someone prepared to call anything inconvenient a misunderstanding. Maya did not rush. She did not let the wedding coordinator guide her into position. She walked down the aisle beside Rose, not because Rose needed to be rescued, but because neither of them would be separated again to make someone else comfortable. Grant tried to meet Maya with concern. He made the expression of a man ready to forgive a bride for panicking under pressure. He moved toward her, as though the only obstacle between them was a private emotional moment that could be smoothed over with the right words. Maya stopped several feet away. She told him, before their families and the people who had come to admire them, that there would be no wedding. She said she could not marry a man who treated her aunt's dignity as an inconvenience. She could not marry someone who used charity to build his image while hiding the harm done to the people who trusted him. And she would not sign away her voice so that the Holloway family could keep calling itself generous. The room did not explode into chaos. Real shock rarely does. It arrived as stillness. Grant's first instinct was to deny everything. He insisted that Rose had misunderstood old documents and that Maya had been manipulated on an emotional day. He suggested that the papers belonged in the hands of lawyers, not guests. In a narrow sense, he was right. The documents did belong with lawyers. That was exactly where Rose had already sent them. But Grant made one mistake. In trying to diminish Rose, he revealed the same contempt that had brought them all to that moment. He described her as a former employee who had spent too long attached to the family's past. He spoke as though years of service made her less credible, not more. Several people in the room looked at one another. Some had worked with the foundation. Some had seen the polished version of Grant for years. And suddenly, they remembered the staff members who had vanished, the programs announced with fanfare and then quietly abandoned, the questions that had never received answers. Catherine rose from her seat and tried to take control. She suggested postponing the ceremony, moving the discussion somewhere private, protecting Maya from further embarrassment. But Maya understood the language now. Private had always meant hidden. Protected had always meant silenced. She placed the cedar box on the front pew and walked out of the chapel with Rose. The photographs later showed the moment in a way no one could have planned. The bride was still wearing white, but she was not crying. Rose was still carrying her worn canvas bag. Behind them, the flowers, musicians, and imported decorations remained exactly where they had been placed. Expensive proof that beauty could not save a lie once the truth had entered the room. The fallout did not happen in one dramatic afternoon. It happened through letters, audits, meetings, frozen accounts, and people finally realizing they were no longer alone. Within 48 hours, the independent trustees filed for an emergency review of the Holloway Foundation. The legal practice confirmed the authenticity of Eleanor's codicil. Grant's public role was suspended, while outside auditors examined the records, and Catherine resigned from the board before the trustees could vote to remove her. The family's public relations team called it a dispute over estate documents, but that explanation collapsed when former employees began sharing their own records. Helena Ward came forward first, with years of emails showing that Grant's office had delayed grants until media campaigns could be arranged. A regional coordinator described programs cut because the children they served did not fit the right image. A finance manager produced instructions to classify image-building expenses as community outreach. The Holloways had protected themselves by making each person believe their experience was isolated. Once those people compared their records, the pattern was impossible to deny. The investigation found that Grant had inherited a culture of manipulation from Catherine and had learned to make it look modern, polished, and strategic. But he had intensified it. He planned to make Maya the face of an education campaign because her sincerity gave him what money could not buy: credibility. Grant had spent years deciding which children were visible enough to deserve help. In the end, his future depended on the testimony of people he had tried to make invisible. The protective trust took control of the foundation's voting rights. It rebuilt the board with teachers, community representatives, former program staff, and independent financial oversight. Grants were reviewed, neglected programs were restored where possible, and the people who had been ignored were finally given a chance to speak before decisions were made again. Grant faced civil cases, financial inquiries, lost partnerships, and the collapse of the public platform he had treated as proof of his worth. More painful to him than the money was the loss of control. For the first time, he could not shape the narrative with a smile, a speech, or a carefully placed photograph. Catherine watched the family name become a symbol of everything Eleanor had tried to prevent. She was undone, not by a stranger, but by the records of the woman she had dismissed as powerless. Rose did not become rich or accept a seat at the head of the foundation. She returned to her small apartment and neighborhood clinic, but the trustees asked her to serve as a community advisor. She agreed only if teachers and families had more influence than donors. Maya took time away from work after the wedding that never happened. She grieved the man she thought Grant was, the future she had imagined, and the embarrassment of having nearly walked into a life designed to shrink her. But she did not regret leaving. She learned that heartbreak was not proof of weakness. Sometimes it was proof that a person had chosen truth before comfort. Months later, Maya returned to her classroom. The room still had chipped tables, picture cards, and students who needed more help than the system could easily provide. But the Holloway Foundation, now under new oversight, funded the program without camera crews or branding requirements. Maya refused the title of ambassador when the trustees offered it. She chose instead to help create a teacher-led advisory group that no single wealthy family could control. On the first day the new devices arrived, Maya watched one of her students use a communication screen to tell his mother that he was happy. It was a small sentence. No newspaper printed it. No donor stood nearby to claim credit. Yet Maya thought of Eleanor, of Rose, and of all the people whose names had been hidden in a ledger because someone believed their lives were not impressive enough to matter. That was the lesson Grant Holloway never understood. A person's value is not measured by the room they are allowed to enter, the clothes they can afford, or the power they seem to hold. It is measured by what they do when someone else's dignity is placed in their hands. And sometimes, the person everyone tries to remove from the room is the only one carrying the truth that can save it. If this story moved you, remember this. Never confuse polished appearances with good character. The way someone treats those they believe cannot help them will always reveal more than the words they use in public.
That woman does not belong in this hearing.
Everyone watched the wrong woman. Leonard noticed the box.
How is that box here?
Naomi stayed perfectly still.
I did not come here for myself.
A red seal waited.
Please let the record speak.
And the moment Leonard saw that red seal, his practiced calm disappeared.
That seal was never supposed to surface.
Arthur sat trapped in silence.
I am still here.
His mind was still awake.
I understand what is happening.
Leonard controlled every word.
He cannot manage these decisions anymore.
He turned illness into weakness.
My uncle needs someone to protect him.
He called Naomi dangerous.
She is using his condition to get close to his money.
He still has the right to be heard.
She came to restore his voice.
The seal will be examined.
And its secret began 3 days earlier. The seal mattered because Arthur had tried to tell Naomi about it 3 days before the hearing, when everyone around him had already decided that his broken speech meant a broken mind. He was sitting in a rehabilitation room at St. Agnes Medical Center, his right hand resting weakly against a laminated communication board. The board contained simple pictures meant to help him choose water, food, pain medicine, rest, and family. Leonard had approved it because it made Arthur look helpless. It reduced a man who had built one of the largest manufacturing companies in the state to a row of small drawings that other people could interpret for him. But Arthur did not point to water. He did not point to home. He did not point to Leonard, even though Leonard had been standing nearby with the patient patience of a man performing concern for an audience. Arthur kept pressing one unremarkable image near the bottom of the board, a small brass lantern. The nurses assumed he wanted the bedside light adjusted. Leonard assumed he was confused. Naomi understood that Arthur was trying to reach a place that had been designed for exactly this moment. For nearly 40 years, Wren Meridian Industries had been known as Arthur Wren's Company. It had begun with a single machine shop on the eastern edge of the city and grown into a national manufacturer of building systems, public transit equipment, and low-cost modular housing. Arthur had become wealthy, but the company's most important story was never its market value. Its story was the people who had stayed when business was difficult. Welders, machinists, warehouse workers, clerks, maintenance crews, and families who could trace 3 generations of steady work back to the same factory gates. Arthur liked to say that a company was not a monument to the person who founded it. It was a promise made to the people whose hands kept it standing. He had put that belief into practice in ways that irritated investors and inspired employees. Wren Meridian maintained a housing division that built durable apartments for working families. It funded scholarships for trade students. It kept a medical assistance program for retired employees long after accountants argued that the expense no longer made business sense. Those choices were not sentimental accidents. Arthur had seen what happened when executives treated workers as numbers in a report. His own father had lost a job during a factory consolidation when Arthur was young, and the memory had stayed with him. Success, he believed, meant little if it required people who had given their lives to a business to become disposable the moment they became inconvenient. Leonard Hale had never shared that belief. He was Arthur's sister's son, and from the beginning, he had learned how to make ambition look like devotion. Leonard had joined the company 15 years earlier, after an impressive career in consulting. He understood market language, shareholder pressure, acquisition strategy, and the polished way successful people could turn a selfish proposal into a speech about the future. He could make a layoff sound like a rescue plan. He could make the sale of a neighborhood look like innovation. He could sit beside a worried employee, lower his voice, touch their shoulder, and leave them feeling that they had been heard, even while he prepared to do the opposite of what they needed. Arthur had noticed Leonard's talent long before he recognized the danger beneath it. He made his nephew chief operating officer because the company was changing and because he believed younger leadership needed room to grow. Leonard rewarded that trust by becoming indispensable. He learned every division, befriended board members, cultivated bankers, and placed loyal executives in positions where they could control the flow of information. By the time Arthur began asking difficult questions about certain transactions, Leonard had already built a circle around himself. The conflict between them had started quietly. Leonard wanted to sell Wren Meridian's housing division to a private investment group called Horizon Vale Partners. The sale would be described as a strategic restructuring. Investors would receive a large immediate return. Wren Meridian would become leaner, more profitable, and easier to reposition for a future public offering. Leonard spoke about the proposal as though it were the only rational answer to a changing economy. Arthur saw something else. He saw rents rising, workers being pushed farther from their jobs, and an entire mission being handed to people who had never cared about it. He knew Horizon Vale had a record of buying affordable properties, cutting maintenance, raising fees, and selling them again when the numbers improved. He also knew that once the division was gone, it would never return. For 2 years, Arthur refused to approve the sale. He delayed meetings, requested independent reviews, and kept his voting shares locked behind a trust structure that made a quick takeover difficult. Leonard smiled through every disagreement. In public, he praised his uncle's wisdom. In private, he began preparing for the day Arthur could no longer stand in his way. That day appeared to arrive on a cold Sunday morning in early March, when Arthur suffered a stroke. The stroke did not take his memory. It did not erase his judgment. It damaged the part of his brain that helped turn thoughts into spoken language. The doctors explained that he had aphasia, a condition that could make it painfully difficult to find words, form sentences, read quickly, or answer questions under pressure. To anyone willing to slow down, use written choices, allow time, and listen beyond speech, Arthur remained unmistakably himself. He recognized people. He understood documents. He reacted strongly to business news. He could point to figures, write fragments, and signal agreement or refusal with remarkable precision. But aphasia was a condition Leonard could exploit because it was easy to misunderstand. When Arthur struggled to answer a question in the hospital, Leonard would gently explain that his uncle had become confused. When Arthur tried to push away papers, Leonard would say he was agitated. When Arthur stared at a visitor with anger because he could not express what he wanted, Leonard would tell the visitor that the stroke had changed him. The people around Arthur were not cruel. Most were simply busy, worried, and unfamiliar with the difference between a person who cannot communicate in the usual way and a person who cannot think. Leonard made that confusion useful. Within days, he arranged for himself to control Arthur's schedule. Visitors had to be approved through Leonard's office. Phone calls were screened. Longtime employees who came to see Arthur were told that he needed quiet. Board members received carefully edited medical summaries. Even Arthur's home staff were warned that too much stimulation could endanger his recovery. Every restriction sounded reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a wall. Naomi Reed saw the wall before anyone else did. She had not been a senior executive at Ren Meridian. She had never attended shareholder dinners or appeared in annual reports. For most of her career, Naomi had worked in the Records and Preservation Department, a small office in the oldest building on the company campus. Her work involved minutes from board meetings, trust amendments, land deeds, historical contracts, environmental reports, employee pension records, and the delicate task of deciding what should be protected when everyone else wanted more space. It was work that made powerful people impatient. They wanted files quickly. They wanted old disputes forgotten. They wanted signatures without context and summaries without inconvenient attachments. Naomi had learned that the most important document in a room was often the one someone called outdated. She had come to Ren Meridian in her 20s after her father injured his back at the factory and could no longer work steady shifts. Her father had been proud of the company even when it failed him. He kept a photograph of Arthur shaking hands with a line of welders after a contract victory. And he told Naomi that men like Arthur were rare because they still remembered the names of people who worked below them. Naomi did not romanticize the company. She knew its history included mistakes, layoffs, and decisions that hurt people. But she also knew Arthur and his late wife, Beatrice, had spent decades trying to build safeguards against the kind of greed that could erase a company's conscience in a single board meeting. Beatrice had been the first person at Ren Meridian to treat Naomi's work as something more than storage. She had a scholar's mind and a practical understanding of human weakness. She believed that people often behaved honorably when circumstances were easy, but true character appeared when money, illness, inheritance, and fear entered the same room. Years before Arthur's stroke, Beatrice had begun building a separate system for critical records. She called it the Lantern Archive because, in her words, hidden things should have a light kept for them. The archive was not a secret fortune or a private collection of gossip. It contained certified copies of documents that could matter if family pressure, corporate pressure, or medical crisis ever placed Arthur's intentions at risk. Arthur agreed because he understood what Beatrice was protecting. He had seen families tear themselves apart over a will. He had seen elderly founders surrounded by advisors who suddenly became experts on what was best for them. He had seen how quickly a person's own wishes could disappear once people decided that age, illness, or slow speech made those wishes inconvenient. The Lantern Archive was lodged not in Ren Meridian's offices, but in the county's restricted records repository. The company kept reference copies, but the certified originals were stored under a protocol requiring a court order, an independent records officer, and a documented chain of custody. Naomi had helped organize the material, but she could not open it alone. No one could. That was the point. Leonard knew the archive existed. Naomi was certain of it. He had attended the meeting years earlier, when the capacity safeguards were discussed. Although he had acted bored at the time, he had called them overly cautious and expensive. Beatrice had smiled politely, then asked that his objection be entered into the minutes. After Arthur's stroke, the first sign that Leonard was moving against Naomi came quietly. 2 folders vanished from the company records room. They were not dramatic files. One contained old board resolutions related to Arthur's voting shares. The other held correspondence about the Lantern Archive. Naomi noticed because she knew every box number and accession date. When she asked the new compliance manager about the missing folders, she was told that Leonard had ordered a document review. 3 days later, Naomi was informed that her position had been eliminated in a restructuring. The letter was efficient and cold. It praised her long service, offered a severance package, and required her to return all company property. It also contained a warning that unauthorized retention or disclosure of internal materials could lead to legal action. Naomi understood the message beneath the formal language. Leonard was not simply removing her from payroll. He was making sure that if she spoke up, people would assume she had stolen something. She went home that afternoon carrying an empty cardboard box. In the box were a framed photograph of her father, a small brass paperweight shaped like a lantern, and a note Beatrice had written years earlier after Naomi stayed late to recover a damaged pension ledger. The note thanked her for believing that records were a form of respect. For 2 weeks, Naomi did nothing, not because she did not care, but because she knew that rushing toward a man like Leonard would only give him the story he wanted. He needed her to appear emotional, resentful, and unstable. He needed the court to see a dismissed employee rather than a witness to something larger. Then Arthur's old driver called her from a number she did not recognize. The driver had worked for Arthur for 27 years. He sounded frightened. Leonard had reassigned him, but he had seen Arthur during a transfer between appointments. Arthur had struggled to hold a notepad. On it, he had drawn a rectangle, a red circle, and a small lantern. The driver did not understand, but he remembered Naomi had once spoken about old company records. He thought she might. Naomi understood immediately. The rectangle was a document box. The red circle was a seal. The lantern was the archive. She contacted Daniel Park, the attorney the probate court had appointed to represent Arthur's interests in the guardianship case. Daniel was not Leonard's lawyer and not Naomi's ally. He was a careful attorney with a reputation for taking difficult cases seriously. But when Naomi first called, he sounded tired. He had already reviewed the medical report from Dr. Martin Vale, a respected neurologist, who concluded that Arthur could not make complex decisions. He had also listened to Leonard's account of a confused old man being manipulated by a former employee. Daniel agreed to meet Naomi only because Arthur's driver had independently confirmed the strange drawing. Naomi did not try to impress him. She did not pretend to have answers she did not possess. She placed copies of her employment records, the severance letter, the archive protocol, and a timeline of missing files on the table between them. She explained what aphasia was. She explained why a hurried verbal examination could not determine whether Arthur understood financial decisions. And she explained that the Lantern Archive might contain documents relevant to any attempt to take control of Arthur's property. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked the question Leonard had wanted everyone to ask. Why should anyone believe a fired records employee over a nephew, a doctor, and a board of directors? Naomi answered that they should not believe her because she was fired. They should verify the record because the record either existed or it did not. That answer changed something. Daniel checked the county repository. The Lantern Archive was real. Its access conditions were real. And most importantly, a limited request for emergency guardianship had been filed by Leonard only 48 hours after the first scheduled board discussion of the Horizon Vale sale. The timing did not prove wrongdoing, but it made the request impossible to ignore. The guardianship petition was written to sound compassionate. It described Arthur as vulnerable, confused, and unable to understand the consequences of business decisions. It argued that without a responsible family member in charge, Arthur's health and assets could be endangered. Leonard offered himself as the obvious solution. He claimed he had no conflict of interest because he sought no personal gain and only wished to preserve the company his uncle loved. What the petition did not mention was the vote. Arthur's shares represented enough voting power to block the sale of the housing division. If a guardian controlled those shares, the board could approve the deal. If the deal went through, Horizon Vale would pay advisory fees to several outside firms. One of those firms, according to a thin thread Daniel found in public business filings, was connected to a company called Northwatch Strategies. Northwatch Strategies had been formed 6 months earlier by Leonard's former college roommate. It had no public website, no employees listed beyond a mailing address, and no history of major consulting work. Yet it had suddenly been named as a strategic transition advisor in preliminary documents related to the potential sale. Daniel did not accuse Leonard immediately. He knew better. A suspicious company was not proof. A coincidence was not proof. But the pattern was beginning to form. The day before the probate hearing, Daniel petitioned Judge Imani Cole for authority to inspect the Lantern Archive under the court's supervision. Leonard objected through his counsel, arguing that old documents would only distract from Arthur's present medical condition. He also claimed that Naomi had manufactured the entire issue because she resented losing her job. Judge Cole did not approve a full release. She allowed a narrow preliminary inspection by the county records officer, Daniel, and counsel for both sides. Naomi could attend only as a factual witness because she had helped organize the archive. The limitation frustrated her. but it also protected the process. The evidence had to survive more than outrage. It had to survive scrutiny. At the county repository, the red-sealed box was brought from a climate-controlled shelf behind 2 locked doors. The records officer read the accession number aloud. Daniel verified it against the court order. Leonard's attorney watched every movement. Naomi stood with her hands folded, afraid to breathe too loudly. Inside the box were several folders, each stamped with dates and certification marks. The first contained Arthur's Capacity Safeguard Directive, executed 7 years earlier. It did not declare that Arthur would always be competent. It did something more careful. It required that if he ever suffered a condition affecting speech or conventional communication, any assessment of his decision-making ability had to include a qualified specialist familiar with supported communication methods. It also required that no family member with a financial interest in a pending corporate transaction could be appointed to control his voting shares without an independent review. Leonard's attorney dismissed the directive as old planning material. Daniel did not. The document was signed, witnessed, and properly certified. More damaging still, Leonard's name appeared on the final page. He had signed as an acknowledging witness. The second folder contained a limited trust amendment. Arthur had placed a portion of his controlling shares into a protective arrangement designed to prevent a guardian from using temporary medical vulnerability to force a corporate transaction. If Arthur could not communicate, the shares were not to be handed automatically to a relative. They were to be placed under a neutral fiduciary until Arthur's capacity had been properly assessed through the protocol he had chosen. The third folder was more troubling. It included minutes from a private meeting held after Leonard had once asked Arthur to sign broad proxy forms during a period of illness 3 years earlier. Arthur had refused. Beatrice had insisted that the conversation be documented. The minutes did not call Leonard a criminal. They did not predict the future. They simply recorded that Arthur was concerned about pressure from people who might benefit from his inability to participate fully in company decisions. That concern had been sealed with the rest of the archive, because Beatrice believed it could become a family weapon if it were made public too soon. At the end of the inspection, the records officer discovered a fourth folder that had been marked for release only if a petition for guardianship was filed by a person named in the earlier documents. The folder was still sealed in red wax. That was the box Naomi carried into court. Leonard had not expected it to appear. He had expected the archive to remain locked behind procedure long enough for him to gain emergency control. He had expected Arthur's silence to do the work for him. And when he saw the red seal in Naomi's arms, he understood that the courtroom was no longer a place where he could control every question. Judge Cole did not open the sealed folder that first morning. She ordered a short evidentiary hearing, required the parties to submit the materials for verification, and appointed an independent communication specialist to evaluate Arthur. It was not the victory Naomi wanted, but it was the first time in 6 weeks that Arthur's condition would be examined without Leonard deciding what his silence meant. As court recessed, Leonard walked past Naomi without looking at her. His face had returned to its public expression of patience and grief, but his hands were clenched hard enough that the skin around his knuckles had turned pale. Naomi watched him leave and felt no satisfaction yet. The red seal had not proved anything. It had only bought time. And time was exactly what Leonard had been trying to steal. The 48 hours that followed were the longest Arthur had spent without Leonard controlling the story told about him. For the first time since the stroke, People entered his room without first asking Leonard whether the visit was necessary. The independent specialist appointed by Judge Cole was Dr. Alina Mercer, a neuropsychologist whose work focused on assessing decision-making ability in people with aphasia, traumatic brain injury, and other communication disabilities. She did not arrive with a stack of rapid-fire verbal questions and a stopwatch. She arrived with a tablet, written options, visual scales, financial summaries formatted in plain language, and the patience to let silence mean thought rather than failure. Dr. Mercer spent nearly 4 hours with Arthur over 2 sessions. She asked him to identify people he trusted, explain the purpose of his major holdings, recognize the difference between selling an asset and granting someone control over it, and indicate whether he understood the consequences of a guardian voting his shares. She used yes or no confirmation methods, written keywords, picture-supported questions, and repeated checks to make sure a gesture was not being misunderstood. Arthur was slow. Sometimes he became exhausted and had to stop. Sometimes a word appeared on his screen only after several attempts, but the substance of his answers was consistent. He knew the value of his principal assets. He knew the proposed Horizon Vale transaction. He recognized Leonard's role in it. He understood that a guardian could make choices he did not want. And when asked whether he wanted Leonard to control his health decisions or voting shares, Arthur rejected that choice with a clarity that no one in the room could honestly misread. That conclusion did not end the case. Leonard's lawyers argued that capacity could fluctuate and that the complexity of a corporate sale required more than basic understanding. They suggested that Arthur's refusal of Leonard was emotional, influenced by Naomi, and not a reason to leave important decisions unprotected. Their strategy was subtle. They no longer needed to prove Arthur was completely unaware. They only needed to persuade the judge that fear and complexity justified taking control away from him. Daniel began with the independent report. He walked the court through the difference between speech impairment and impaired reasoning. He emphasized that Arthur did not need to prove that he could speak like he had before the stroke. He needed only to show that he could understand and communicate decisions through methods appropriate to his condition. The law was not supposed to reward people for refusing to provide the support that would allow a disabled person to be heard. Leonard's attorney attacked the report carefully. He pointed to Arthur's fatigue. He questioned whether visual aids had made the answers too simple. He noted that Dr. Mercer had met Arthur after Naomi raised concerns, implying that the entire evaluation had been shaped by a former employee's agenda. He tried to turn every accommodation into proof of manipulation. Dr. Mercer did not become defensive. She explained that accommodations did not put thoughts into Arthur's mind. They removed barriers that prevented other people from hearing thoughts already there. She explained that a person using glasses was not being coached to see, and that a person using an interpreter was not being coached to speak. The same principle applied to supported communication. At first, Dr. Vale appeared confident. He had years of clinical experience and a respected private practice. His original assessment was concise, formal, and built around familiar categories. Arthur had failed to answer certain verbal questions quickly. He had struggled to repeat phrases. He had become frustrated during testing. Dr. Vale had concluded that these failures indicated substantial cognitive decline. Daniel did not accuse him of lying. Instead, he asked what methods he had used to distinguish aphasia from loss of executive function. Dr. Vale acknowledged that he had not used a communication board, written choice assessment, extended response time, or consultation with a speech-language specialist. He said the setting had been urgent and that he relied on professional judgment. Daniel then asked whether Leonard's office had arranged the assessment and whether Leonard had remained nearby during portions of the examination. Dr. Vale said yes. He explained that Leonard had been concerned about Arthur's agitation and wanted the process completed quickly. The next question changed the air in the room. Daniel asked whether Dr. Vale had disclosed a consulting agreement between his clinic and Northwatch Strategies. The agreement had been found in documents produced after the court ordered a limited financial disclosure. It was not a direct payment for the guardianship opinion. That would have been too obvious. Instead, Northwatch had retained Dr. Vale's clinic months earlier to provide executive wellness consulting for a future transition project. The work had not yet begun in any meaningful way, but the contract promised a substantial fee if the Horizon Vale transaction closed. The capacity directive from the Lantern Archive showed that Leonard had known about the safeguards. The trust amendment showed he could not automatically control Arthur's shares if he stood to gain from a pending transaction. But Leonard continued to deny that he had any personal interest in the Horizon Vale sale. He claimed Northwatch was an outside consultant chosen by the buyer. He claimed he had no ownership in it, no promised payment, and no reason to want the vote outcome beyond the good of the company. Then Daniel introduced the records obtained through the court-supervised review of Ren Meridian's transaction files. They were not sensational documents. There was no single email in which Leonard confessed to stealing from Arthur. There was no recording of him laughing about his uncle's stroke. The truth arrived in the way real financial deception often arrived, through dates, signatures, spreadsheets, and words that had been chosen too carefully. The first document was an early draft of the Horizon Vale term sheet. In its original form, Northwatch was listed as an independent transition advisor. In a later version, a small notation appeared in the payment schedule. It referred to an incentive allocation for a beneficial participant identified only by initials. Daniel displayed a separate compliance questionnaire signed by Leonard during negotiations. On that form, Leonard had answered that he had no direct or indirect financial interest in any outside party connected to the transaction. The initials in the incentive schedule matched Leonard's full legal name. Leonard's attorney objected immediately. He argued that initials were ambiguous. Daniel agreed that, standing alone, they could mean many things. He then introduced a second document, a private side letter between Northwatch and a holding company called Hale Family Ventures. The holding company was not listed on Ren Meridian's public disclosures, but corporate registration records showed that it was controlled by a trust established for Leonard's children. The side letter promised that if the sale closed, Hale Family Ventures would receive a percentage of Northwatch's success fee. The payment would not go directly into Leonard's personal account. It would flow through a family trust designed to make the connection difficult to see at a glance. That was not merely a conflict of interest. It was the exact type of indirect financial benefit Arthur's trust amendment had been created to prevent. Leonard's expression did not collapse. He was too disciplined for that. But the rhythm of his composure changed. He began consulting with his lawyer more often. He stopped looking at Arthur. And for the first time, the people who had believed his story could see the outline of the trap he had built. Daniel continued. The next record showed that the guardianship petition had been prepared using information from a draft proxy package. The proxy package was dated 4 days before Leonard filed in court. It assumed that someone other than Arthur would control his voting shares at the upcoming board meeting. It did not name Leonard directly, but the instructions matched the authority he sought in the guardianship petition. Leonard had not simply responded to a medical crisis. He had begun arranging the corporate consequences of Arthur's incapacity before a judge had ever examined whether Arthur was incapable. Judge Cole asked whether there was evidence Leonard had discussed the proxy plan before Arthur's stroke. Daniel said there was not. He did not exaggerate. The court could not punish a man for plans that had not been proven. But the sequence after the stroke was enough to show urgency of a different kind. Leonard had treated Arthur's illness as an opportunity before he treated it as a human tragedy. At that point, the county records officer was called forward with the final red-sealed folder from the Lantern archive. The procedure was slow by design. The officer identified the accession number, confirmed the court order, and described the condition of the seal. Daniel and Leonard's counsel examined it. Judge Cole asked whether either party disputed that the seal had remained intact since it was placed in county custody. Neither did. When the officer broke the wax, the sound was quiet. It was not the sound of a dramatic weapon being drawn. It was the sound of a barrier giving way after years of pressure. Yet every person in the courtroom heard it, because Leonard had spent the entire case trying to make sure that folder remained closed. Inside was a memorandum prepared jointly by Arthur and Beatrice 7 years earlier, along with a notarized statement from the attorney who had advised them at the time. The memorandum described an incident involving blank proxy forms and a proposed transfer of authority. Leonard had approached Arthur during a period of illness following surgery and urged him to sign documents that would allow Leonard to act quickly in corporate matters. Arthur had refused after reading the papers. Beatrice had been disturbed enough to insist on a written record. The memorandum did not claim Leonard had committed a crime then. It stated that Arthur believed Leonard had minimized the scope of the proxy forms and had become angry when asked to wait for independent counsel. Because the family chose not to make the matter public, the documents had been stored in the Lantern archive as part of Arthur's future capacity planning. Attached to the memorandum was a statement of intent signed by Arthur. It said that if any future health condition limited his speech or mobility, he wanted the people around him to distinguish between inability to perform quickly and inability to decide. It stated that he did not want Leonard appointed as guardian, proxy, conservator, or controller of his voting shares without an independent review, particularly if Leonard could benefit from a company transaction. Leonard had signed an acknowledgement that he had received notice of this statement. That signature was the moment his defense became almost impossible to sustain. For weeks, he had told the court he believed he was the natural person to take charge, because Arthur had never expressed any other preference. He had sworn that he knew of no binding instructions limiting his role. Now the court had certified documents showing that he knew exactly what Arthur wanted, and had been warned years earlier that he was not to use illness as a path to control. The damage went beyond the guardianship case. It reached his credibility in every statement he had made under oath. Judge Cole did not rush to pronounce judgment. She reviewed the materials, asked questions about dates, and gave Leonard's attorney time to respond. The lawyer argued that the old memorandum reflected a family disagreement, not a legal finding. He argued that Leonard's signature on an acknowledgement did not mean he remembered every provision years later. He argued that his client's concern for Arthur could still be genuine, despite an undisclosed financial interest. Some of those arguments were not absurd. That was what made the case important. Justice did not require pretending that every difficult family conflict had a simple villain. It required looking at the entire pattern. The pattern was what condemned Leonard. Arthur's speech had been impaired, but he had been denied meaningful accommodations. Leonard had sought emergency control at the exact moment Arthur's shares mattered most. Leonard had withheld capacity safeguards that named him as a conflicted party. His doctor had failed to disclose a financial relationship connected to the transaction. A hidden family trust stood to profit from the sale. And the sealed record established that Leonard had been warned years earlier that Arthur feared exactly this kind of pressure. Taken together, it was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. Before Judge Cole issued her decision, she asked Arthur whether he wished to make his own preference known. Arthur's communication tablet rested on the table in front of him. Dr. Mercer sat nearby but did not touch it. Arthur looked at the screen for a long time. His left hand moved slowly, selecting letters one by one. He paused. He deleted a letter. He began again. No one hurried him. No one interpreted the silence for him. For the first time since his stroke, the entire room waited for Arthur at Arthur's pace. When he finished, Dr. Mercer verified the message with him using a second method. Arthur confirmed that he did not want Leonard to make decisions for him. He confirmed that he wanted independent assistance while recovering. And he confirmed that he wanted the housing division protected until he could participate fully in any decision affecting it. The meaning was simple. Arthur had never asked to be rescued from his own life. He had asked to be heard. Judge Cole denied Leonard's petition for emergency guardianship. She found that Arthur had demonstrated decision-making capacity with appropriate supports, and that Leonard's undisclosed financial interests created a serious conflict. She ordered that no one could exercise authority over Arthur's personal voting shares without further court approval. She directed the parties to implement a supported decision-making plan, including access to independent medical, legal, and communication professionals. She also ordered the record transmitted to the appropriate authorities for review of possible false statements in the guardianship petition, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and financial misconduct connected to the proposed transaction. The order did not declare Leonard guilty of crimes. It did something more immediate and more devastating. It removed his ability to hide behind the appearance of concern. The court had not sent him away in handcuffs. There was no satisfying instant punishment, no sudden collapse under flashing cameras. Leonard left the courtroom surrounded by lawyers, his face pale and controlled. But the world he had built depended on people believing that he was trustworthy. That belief had been broken in public by the very process he had tried to use as a weapon. The consequences unfolded over the following months. Ren Meridian's board placed Leonard on administrative leave while an independent investigation began. Several directors who had accepted his version of events admitted that they had not asked enough questions about Arthur's condition or the Horizon Vale proposal. The sale was halted. The company's compliance office discovered that Northwatch had been included in internal planning long before it had been properly disclosed. Investigators traced the expected success fee through Hale Family Ventures and found additional communications showing that Leonard had pressed staff to speed the guardianship filing before the board vote. Dr. Vale faced a separate professional review. His report was not treated as worthless simply because it was inconvenient. Medical errors and conflicts needed evidence, not anger. But reviewers concluded that he had failed to use appropriate methods for a patient with aphasia and had not disclosed a material financial connection. His opinion was formally withdrawn from the guardianship case, and his clinic lost several institutional contracts that depended on public trust. Leonard's legal troubles took longer, as real legal troubles often did. Financial records had to be examined. Witnesses had to be interviewed. Lawyers argued over intent, disclosure rules, and the difference between poor judgment and criminal deception. But the investigation did not disappear. It grew. And the same careful documentation Leonard had believed he could control became the trail that followed him. Arthur did not return overnight to the man he had been before the stroke. Recovery was uneven. Some days, speaking remained exhausting. Some days, he grew angry at the patience his new life required. But the difference was that no one used those difficult days as permission to take away his choices. With Dr. Mercer's support, Arthur learned new communication tools. He began attending shortboard sessions remotely, reviewing materials in advance, and responding through a combination of typed notes, visual summaries, and scheduled breaks. The first time he voted against reopening negotiations with Horizon Vale, he did so slowly and unmistakably. The board secretary recorded the vote. No one called it confusion. He also made a decision that surprised many people. Instead of simply preserving the housing division under his personal control, Arthur transferred a significant share of it into a community benefit structure. Employees, tenant representatives, and an independent public interest board received defined oversight roles. The arrangement did not solve every problem. It did not turn a corporation into a perfect institution, but it made it harder for one ambitious executive to sell a mission built by thousands of people without answering to those people. Naomi refused the public attention that came afterward. Reporters tried to describe her as a hero, but she disliked the word. Heroes, she thought, were often used to make ordinary responsibility sound extraordinary. She had only done what her work had taught her to do: preserve what mattered, ask what was missing, and refuse to let a person be erased because listening required effort. Arthur asked her to return to Ren Meridian, not as an assistant and not as a symbolic employee. He offered her the role of director of the newly expanded Lantern Archive and its companion advocacy program. The program would help families understand supported decision-making, protect older adults from financial exploitation, and teach organizations how to communicate with people whose disabilities made them easy to dismiss. Naomi accepted only after insisting on one condition. The program could not exist merely to polish the company's image. It had to serve people who had no connection to Ren Meridian and no ability to repay the help. Arthur agreed. A year later, the Lantern Center opened in a restored building near the old factory. Its walls held photographs of workers, copies of historical agreements, and shelves of records that many executives would once have called obsolete. There were meeting rooms for families, legal clinics staffed by volunteers, communication resources for stroke survivors, and a quiet reading room where Naomi kept Beatrice's brass paperweight beneath a glass case. Arthur attended the opening. He spoke only a few words, each one hard-earned. But he did not need many. The people in the room waited for him. That was the difference. Naomi stood near the archive room afterward and watched a young woman help her grandfather use a tablet to fill out a form. The older man took his time. No one reached for the device to answer in his place. No one called him confused because the silence lasted longer than expected. Naomi thought about the first morning in court, when Leonard had tried to make her look like the problem. He had underestimated her because her work was quiet. He had underestimated Arthur because his speech was slow. He had underestimated records because he believed power belonged to whoever held the microphone. But truth did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it waited in a sealed box. Sometimes it lived in a forgotten signature. Sometimes it survived because an ordinary person refused to throw away what others wanted erased. The lesson of Arthur Wren's case was not that every wealthy family hid a villain behind a polished smile. It wasn't that illness always revealed betrayal. The deeper lesson was that dignity depends on more than the ability to speak quickly, look powerful, or defend yourself in the language others expect. A person can be silent and still be certain. A person can be disabled and still deserve control over their own life. And whenever someone insists that another human being is too weak to be heard, we should ask who benefits from the silence, because the most dangerous people are not always the ones who shout. Sometimes they are the ones who speak softly while reaching for someone else's voice. And sometimes all it takes to stop them is one person willing to preserve the truth until the moment the world is finally ready to listen.